Fala galera do canal, beleza? Aliados Gamers novamente com vocês. Galera, estamos aí, né, para mais uma cobertura sobre Xbox. Vamos ver se eu já tô ao vivo aqui, galera, rapidão. Deixa eu ver aqui, deixa eu abrir o meu canal. Um evento bem legal aí que eu queria assistir com vocês, né? Queria cobrir com vocês aí, que é o evento sobre a história do Xbox, que já lançou inclusive, né? Nossa, duplicou aqui o evento, meu Deus. Deu pau aqui no canal. Deixa eu ver como é que ficou o áudio aqui, como é que tá o áudio. Xbox, legal, tá rodando. Vamos ver se eu já tô ao vivo. Maravilha, galera, tá com um delayzinho, mas tá rodando, tá beleza. Quero mandar um salve pra galera que tá chegando. Duplicou aí, depois eu vou ter que excluir uma das duas lives, né? Porque acabou duplicando a live, é que eu tô com o PC diferente, trabalhando num PC diferente. E acaba que, às vezes, dá esses erros por causa também do OBS novo, né? Que eu instalei, agora tá configurando tudo diferente. Espero que a qualidade esteja boa pra vocês aí, tá, pessoal? Bom, estamos aqui, galera, para fazer a cobertura, esse que eu considero um evento surpresa, né, aqui do canal, sobre Xbox, galera. Um evento bacana, onde eu quero assistir com vocês aqui, né, o Power On, The Story of Xbox. Tá em legendas em português, é um documentário muito legal aí, sobre a história do Xbox. Eu não assisti nada, absolutamente, então tudo vai ser novidade aqui pra mim, né, desse evento, e claro, pra vocês, provavelmente vocês também não assistiram, né. Quero mandar um salve pro Bytridge, que tá aí, moderador do canal, o Alec YouTube, o Rodrigo Seixas, o Eric Aguiar, o Gamer 2.0, o Pikachu Gordinho e o Pachenko. Tô bem, graças a Deus. O Tido Baxter também. Galera, aí, espero que a qualidade esteja boa pra vocês aqui, ó, pra quem não sabe qual que é o acontecimento que a gente tá registrando, é esse aqui, né, a história do Xbox pelo canal do Xbox. Não tem no Xbox Brasil. Eu acho que eles podiam dublar, né, e colocar no Xbox Brasil, seria legal, um documentário bem interessante. Vamos assistir, vamos reagir juntos aqui, né, nessa live. E se vocês gostarem, ó, a gente vai fazer aqui o primeiro capítulo. Se vocês gostarem, a gente vai então trazer os próximos capítulos pra gente assistir junto, né, nos próximos dias, beleza? Pra quem não sabe, esse documentário, né, ele tem alguns capítulos, tá? Esse aqui é só o capítulo 1, que a gente vai falar agora dele, mostrar agora ele pra vocês aí. Então vamos lá, vamos assistir juntos aí, beleza, pessoal? Galera que curte Xbox tá aqui comigo, não tá? Então só vamos, né, galera? Deixa eu só ver aqui, caras, em off, porque, meu, tá uma bagunça. Eu acabei bugando tudo aqui, tá duplicado o evento. Tô até preocupado lá com o outro, como é que vai ficar. Que ficou as duas... Nossa, mano, virou uma bagunça aqui. Mas enfim, vamos lá, vamos que vamos. Deixa eu começar aqui o evento então, o documentário então.
Video games are one of the most powerful mediums ever created. This merger of imagination and technology has introduced a fundamental evolution in human interaction. And now represents a culture of 2.4 billion gamers connected worldwide. Yes! But just 20 years ago, the console that kicked off the era of online gaming in the living room almost didn't exist.
Do you ever want to make hardware?
No, that's one thing that we
Poderoso
decided not
chegando,
to do.
galera.
The idea that Microsoft could ever create a game console was seen as a bit of a joke.
Microsoft.
They wear khakis and they're boring and they're Office and they're Windows.
Might as well call it Nerd Box, right?
I can't imagine how it could be better.
A new console was seen as a risky bet
There it is.
at a company not accustomed to losing.
You're proposing taking money away from Windows in order to fund some game system?
That is an insane business to get into.
It was fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
We're gonna make it, aren't we, sir?
This is the story of how a passionate group of gamers forever changed the course of a corporate titan.
They saw the future.
Broadband internet to the television set.
Like, you can do that?
And then Bill says, we should do this. We should let these guys do this.
And the journey to get that controller into our hands.
This thing is going to be the most badass thing you can imagine.
Fire at will!
Think about the way you could tell stories with that.
No matter where you are in the world, we can all be part of one bigger community.
We need this. This is like the hotline for us.
You take it for granted now, but back then this was like science fiction.
We weren't sure how we were gonna do it.
Xbox, watch TV.
Oh, God. Oh, hell no!
Essa foi cruel, hein?
Gamers are not going to be tolerant of any level of bull at all.
The risk here was enormous.
You're always just one catastrophic bug away from not making it.
I remember thinking, hey, maybe we're in over our heads.
There's a new contender in the video game wars.
Xbox is going to be the future.
Truly the future of video games.
Xbox.
Taking over the living room.
Limitless, connected digital entertainment.
You guys never understood.
The company is going to face fierce competition.
Sniper!
It's a ticking time bomb.
Makes me very nervous to actually play this for you.
Xbox getting a major overhaul.
A bold vision for the future of gaming.
Muito bom, hein, galera? Muito bom. Vai começar a brincadeira, hein? Salve, Gabriel. Sim, cara, é o documentário. A gente vai aqui reagir o documentário aí ao vivo dessa empresa magnífica que é a Microsoft aí com o seu Xbox, né?
I'm Bill Gates, chairman of Microsoft. In this video, you're going to see the future. Microsoft first came up with the Windows concept back in 1983.
I'm going to show you real quickly a couple highlights from the product. The graphics interface is an integral part of this new generation to take PCs much further than they've gone before.
When I came to Microsoft in 1987, the average age was 27, and I was 27. We were an amazing young company with an amazing young founder in Bill Gates.
He knew business better than anybody out there, and he also knew technology. He was able to synthesize things that nobody else in the industry could.
It was incredibly fast-moving. It was the kind of place where people didn't hold back. For someone who just wanted to really let loose and grow and learn, it was an amazing place.
Bill Gates and the team back then were the disruptors, which was exciting and palpable.
We just thought of ourselves kind of the rebels, kind of, you know, where the big companies like IBM were these huge companies, but we were this little rebel group of hackers, you know, doing this cool work.
I'm very optimistic about where we're going.
But that really changed in '95.
Windows 95 has taken over computer stores.
They were online in the middle of the night. Personal computer users packed into stores dying to get their hands on one.
When Windows 95 launched, it was like a coming out party for the whole company.
Microsoft made a thing that everybody in the world wanted. It was like air to me. It just was. It existed and you needed it.
In today's world, you can't make it without a computer.
It has thousands of programs that some of us may need.
I can run 3 or 4 applications at the same time.
Windows 95 is so easy, even a talk show host can figure it out.
By the late 90s, Windows was dropping $1 billion to the bottom line every month.
3, 2, 1,
It was the most profitable business in the history of the human race. I don't think there's ever been anything remotely like it unless you count the Spaniards going to the New World and like literally hollowing out a mountain made of silver.
Microsoft, which has a business relationship with NBC, is the most powerful engine in the new age of computers, a giant cash machine, and it strongly disagrees with the government.
In the late 90s, we were sort of the bad guys, the Death Star.
The perception of Microsoft, I think generally, was not great. They were in the middle of the Justice Department monopoly issues.
We were the big gorilla in the room on most subjects. And so people viewed us as sort of the big bad tech company.
By 1999, 90% of computers worldwide used the Microsoft Windows operating system. They were untouchable, without comparison or viable rival.
We've been successful in the operating system world, built a huge PC business, built Microsoft Office into this big business. We were the tech behemoth.
Windows overtook that industry and transformed the world. But during that period, disruption was coming from all sides.
A galera deve estar se perguntando, né? Mas o que tem a ver, né, a Microsoft com Windows, a ver com videogame, com Xbox? Vai chegar lá, galera, já vai chegar lá. Deixa eu fazer essa pausa aqui, aproveitar essa pausa para mandar um salve pra galera que tá aí presente. Salve pra todo mundo que tá chegando aí, viu, pessoal? Muito obrigado pela presença de todos. Sim, galera, é um documentário com a história do Xbox, né, manos? Eu pelo menos me interesso por isso. Se você também se interessa, seja muito bem-vindo, beleza? E eu considero isso aqui um puta de um evento, tá ligado, mano? Um negócio bem interessante mesmo. Vamos lá, vamos continuar ouvindo a história do Xbox aí, galera. Como começou e o Windows tem tudo a ver com isso, né? Olha aí, ó, falou em videogame, olha quem apareceu.
For decades, Sony had been a Japanese electronics giant with a history of producing personal and home entertainment hardware. And then, in 1994, Sony struck gold with the PlayStation, a gaming console with unparalleled success.
The launch of PlayStation really thrust gaming into popular culture in a big way. And Sony saw an opportunity for gaming to be even bigger and touch entertainment.
What Sony discovered was a console was really a Trojan horse to the living room. And once that device got into the living room, it could be a multimedia entertainment device.
Sony was putting different things into the home. They're putting a hard disk here in like a DVR. They're putting memory here. They're putting a processor here. And if they could connect all those things together, it would be a computer, a potentially existential threat to Microsoft.
Without further ado, let me introduce to you the next generation PlayStation technology.
Even before Sony launched PlayStation 2, they were just creating this perception of inevitability. PlayStation 2 was the next big thing, and anything in its way was going to get crushed.
They said our new PlayStation is so powerful that it's going to replace the PC.
Sony was showing a slide at trade shows and to our customers of a future home that was full of PlayStations and didn't have any PCs in it.
Olha aí, ó, concorrência forte do PlayStation com o Xbox, já antes do Xbox lançar, hein? Era uma pedra no caminho aí uma pedra no sapato da Microsoft.
But it was pointed too. I mean, that was a very serious threat.
In the 90s, Microsoft was a paranoid place. And when somebody said Sony's going to put a PC in the living room, that got everybody's attention.
And if Sony was at the point of
Galera,
locking down...
isso que fez o comentário aqui, ó, o... Salve Agnus, beleza, meu querido? Mia, salve Mia. O Jeddah falou que respeita a Sony até o PS2. O Eric perguntou assim, ó, isso é um documentário sobre o Xbox ou sobre o PlayStation, né? Fazendo uma brincadeira. Pois é, galera, mas uma coisa que eu vou falar pra vocês. E aí, Sentinela, salve, salve! Galera, eu vou falar uma coisa importante pra vocês nesse documentário. Entendam uma coisa, muitas vezes aqui no canal eu fui criticado porque eu tinha um canal chamado 100% Xbox, ou um canal mais focado em Xbox, mas de vez em quando eu falo de PlayStation. Entenda que até o Xbox reconhece que o PlayStation é um concorrente de respeito, entenderam? Então, não achem estranho, tá? Porque eu acho que a Sony foi uma das empresas que fez com que o videogame fosse olhado de forma diferente por empresas como a Microsoft. Se não fosse o PlayStation tirar as empresas da zona do conforto, hoje os videogames não seriam como são também. Então o PlayStation teve o seu papel importante, né? E exatamente o que o Agnus falou ali. Salve, Vitor Oliveira, beleza? É exatamente o que o Agnus Prime falou ali, ó. As histórias são entrelaçadas, exatamente. Galera, o PlayStation não existiria se não fosse a Nintendo. O Xbox não existiria se não fosse os demais também, entenderam? Porque precisou nascer da concorrência, de buscar espaço, de continuar mantendo o legado da Microsoft, enfim, vamos assistir que vocês vão entender. Salve o Elton Assunção e muito obrigado, eu não vou saber ler esse nome ali, FVNTVSY, né? Viva a concorrência que faz a coisa valer. Então quando você vê um canal de Xbox muitas vezes falando algo sobre o PlayStation, elogiando ou fazendo uma crítica, saiba que é totalmente compatível, porque uma empresa vive, né, em função do que a outra faz, porque se não tiver concorrência, não tem essa batalha, não tem o consumidor, não tem o que ganhar com isso, entenderam? E Opa, mas não foi a Nintendo. Não disse que foi não disse que foi a Sony, Maurício. O Maurício falou ali, ó. Não foi a Sony que começou, foi a Nintendo e a Sega. Sim, na verdade foi a Atari, né, Maurício? Se nós for voltar então, né, vamos voltar ao primeiro console lá atrás, né, um dos primeiros, né, foi a Atari, né? Depois veio Sega, veio Nintendo, enfim, cada um, o que eu tô querendo dizer, não é que o PlayStation ditou as regras, é que o PlayStation deu uma revolucionada na indústria gamer de certa forma, fazendo com que o Xbox se interessasse por videogame também, né? Salve, Ramon, beleza? Clay Telly, salve, salve. Então, caras, é isso que o Agnus Prime falou ali. A história do Xbox tá entrelaçada com o videogame em geral, mano. Desde o Atari até o PlayStation. Só que assim, o PlayStation foi aquele que deu o gatilho pro Xbox falar assim, peraí, isso aí já tá vindo pro nosso lado. Vocês viram o que eles falaram? Tipo, pô, já tinha gente que tinha um PlayStation em casa e não tinha um PC, né? Então a gente tem que popularizar o PC, entenderam? Mas vamos lá, isso aí, galera. É só a minha visão aí em cima do documentário. Vamos continuar que tá gostoso aqui.
Now in the living room, what was Microsoft going to do?
Olha essa frase.
One possible answer was brewing not.
It was a paranoid place. And when somebody said Sony's going to put a PC in the living room, that got everybody's attention.
And if Sony was at the point of locking down the living room, what was Microsoft going to do?
Viu? O PlayStation moveu a Microsoft.
One possible answer was brewing not from the top executive ranks, but from deep within the Microsoft corporate structure. 4 renegades on the DirectX software team who were working on tech to help developers create games for Windows, and who were united by a fervent belief that games were the future.
I was leading the DirectX development team with one of my colleagues on the marketing side of DirectX, Ted Hasse. You know, the question that we were starting to ask is, where was all this graphics technology headed? Windows had won the desktop operating system wars. So we're starting to ask where there could be threats or opportunities in the future. We quickly narrowed down to games and an all-encompassing entertainment platform for the living room as being an opportunity for us.
Otto had carefully built a career at Microsoft, and he had already taken a risk because Otto could have been an important programmer in a legitimate Microsoft group like Windows or Office. Instead, he chose to be in this DirectX group because he was passionate about graphics.
Ted and I both had folks on our teams we felt could bring some additional brain power to the conversation, including Seamus Blackley.
How do you describe Seamus? He's just a piece of work. One of the most brilliant people I've ever met.
Besides being a physicist and a really amazing mathematician, Seamus really embodied the heart of what it meant to be a game developer.
When I saw arcade games when I was little, when I saw Computer Space, my first idea was not, I want to play this game for hours. My idea was, how can I make my own thing?
One of Ted's employees was Kevin Bacchus, who had a financial and market analysis background.
Kevin's like a Vulcan in the best possible way. His interface to the world is entirely intellectual.
That is correct. We had day jobs for DirectX, but a lot of our thinking was how we could build brand new technology that was single-mindedly focused on making the very best games.
The 4 of us, we played games, and we love games, and we wanted to make them.
Através do DirectX, como a gente chama aqui no Brasil, né? O DirectX aí, como eles falam.
A set of software tools that standardized game development across PC hardware and would.
Foi através do DirectX, né, que começou a ser criado, galera, o Xbox, né? O Xbox foi baseado no DirectX, né? DirectX aí no caso, enfim, meu inglês é péssimo. Deixa eu mandar um salve aqui aproveitando a pausa. Salve, salve galera que tá chegando, viu? Muito obrigado. O Thiago Fagundes perguntou o que tá pegando. Tá pegando um baita documentário sobre a história do Xbox e a gente que parece que é o único canal que tá cobrindo isso daí, viu, pessoal? Então, muito bom, muita satisfação. E uma coisa importante aqui, galera, que eu já ia esquecendo. Vocês verem, primeiro, como um Xbox como a Microsoft é humilde, né? Ela faz um documentário e ela fala dos demais, ela coloca com sinceridade por que ela entrou na indústria, como ela entrou na indústria de jogos, né? Como ela se interessou por isso e não tem vergonha de colocar os seus concorrentes e dar a eles os seus devidos créditos às coisas que aconteceram, né? Então é muito legal, galera, muito legal ver essa postura da Microsoft com esse documentário aí, tá muito bom, mano. Vamos lá, vamos continuar. Não esqueçam, o DirectX foi aonde tudo começou nos jogos em relação ao Xbox, né, que os caras estavam preparando para fazer o Xbox baseado nele depois, né? Depois veio a ser desenvolvido assim.
But the team saw a way to push DirectX further, with an idea that could revolutionize the foundation of console game development.
With Windows and DirectX, we have the platform that everybody wants to do the work on to make the games. We already have the entire infrastructure of everything you need to create all this technology sitting on our platform. If we could only create a single hardware standard, a box designed just to run DirectX. It gave us the idea that we could produce better games than Sony and Nintendo and Sega.
At that time, Japanese game consoles had very proprietary chipsets and they just didn't work very well for, Western developers. The instructions on how to use it would be in Japanese. What the DirectX group was proposing was there's a better way to do this. We're going to use PC architecture that you're familiar with, which is just going to work out of the gate, so they could spend more time crafting and building their games.
They had an incredibly developer-friendly story. You already know how to write these games. If you've written them for PC, you can write them for console as well. That message was pretty powerful.
For us, this was about advancing the gamer's interests and the game developer's interest, which would advance Microsoft's interests. So we decided that this was the right time to try to build support for the idea of Microsoft building a game console. At the same time, nobody ever believed that Microsoft would actually have the audacity to attempt such a thing.
The four of us, we were on a journey to get support for this crazy idea around putting a DirectX-powered box in the living room to deliver interactive content.
We were trying to crash meetings and get traction on this thing.
We were an annoyance.
Nobody knows who the hell we are. And we were constantly discovering super important people who were roadblocks or who wouldn't get it and who didn't think games were important.
You're proposing taking money away from Office development in order to fund some game system?
These people dreaded having meetings.
Galera, olha isso, mano. Os caras bateram em várias portas para tentar criar o Xbox, né? O DirectX dentro de uma caixa, né? E, mano, ninguém aceitava, ninguém achava a ideia boa, mano, e lucrativa. Mano, por quê? Eu não consigo entender, parece genial. Olhando agora, então, a gente vê que os caras estavam certos, né? Mas, tipo, na época parecia absurdo para os empresários lá da Microsoft, a galera que eles foram atrás achavam um absurdo investir nisso, tá ligado? Não é uma coisa... É fantástica, né? Como que as coisas são. E os caras não desistiram, né? Os caras continuaram insistindo. Isso é bacana. Eu tinha lido ali alguém falar que não foi a primeira tentativa, né? Com jogos. Sim, eles tinham colocado no PC também, né? Eles criaram para PC, mas assim, em consoles, acho que o Xbox não foi a primeira tentativa? Eles falando, até o Eric Cardoso falou ali que sim, eles falam do Anel da Morte sem medo, verdade. Eles falam dos erros que cometeram, isso eu acho muito bom, galera. Isso eu acho muito bom. Vamos lá, mano, tá muito interessante isso aqui, galera. Tô amando esse documentário.
No surprise, displacing the stated direction of a company at the scale of Microsoft was not a trivial undertaking.
Realizing that who you knew inside of Microsoft was at least as important as what you knew, we brought in the guy who could try to build support for the idea of Microsoft building our game console, Nat Brown.
I had a lot of time spent talking with different teams and working with kind of long-term strategic planning.
Nat had an incredible network of connections. He opened up a lot of doors for us.
Nat was sort of like our Obi-Wan Kenobi. This wizard figure who would show up and go, oh, I know who you need to call. You need to talk to the guys in this division or that division. He knew the structure to Microsoft.
It's been nothing but a fight to figure out how the place works.
One of the first things Nat said was we needed a proper code name.
something that would plant in people's head and take on a life of its own.
Nat said, well, isn't it really a DirectX box in the living room? I'm like, yeah, it's like a DirectX box. That's what it's about.
And we just put up on the board, let's call it the DirectX box.
So we had this awkward thing in our mouths all the time. It was a DirectX box.
And I remember saying, that's too long, it's just Xbox. And we liked that.
That was our code name as a stand-in until we had something better come along.
We built a business case that showed how big this business could be. To get buy-in on that, you have to distribute it, you have to go socialize it. My trick was getting our stuff in front of executives to make them say, I want to understand this business.
The team set their sights on a logical choice. A senior executive who spoke their language, literally.
Yeah, I'll play real quick.
Ed Fries was a Microsoft lifer. He joined as an intern. Ed had been critical in the development of Office, one of the biggest franchises, even at that time, that Microsoft ever had. He had this passion for games. He loved games. He programmed a game at a very early age.
When most high schoolers were getting their first minimum wage jobs, Fries was already cashing royalty checks from his first game.
So let's take a look at this high-quality product.
A clone of the hit arcade game Frogger, aptly named Froggy.
Highly original, as you can see. Yeah.
When I left Office to go run the games group, people told me I was committing career suicide.
Thank you, that's it. Good night.
They said, why would you leave Office, one of the most important parts of the company, to go work on something no one cares about? And when I got there, running the games group, I found out they were right. No one cared about what I was doing, and that was awesome.
In '95, the games group was really small. It was like 20 people. In a lot of these tech companies, there's not as much respect given for those other disciplines.
Microsoft at the time didn't care very much about games. I think we were just more of a hobby.
We were gamers working in like the bowels of some Microsoft corporate building.
Galera, olha que coisa interessante, né? Inclusive aqui o Sentinela falou, ó, que teve o MSX, né? Que nasceu o Metal Gear. Sim, eu lembro do MSX. Mas o MSX, Sentinela, eu enxergo como um computador, né? Ele não era bem um console, né, cara? O MSX não era uma espécie de computador? Eu nunca tive, tá? O MSX eu só conheço por ouvir falar mesmo. A Mia Trans falou ali, ó, primeiro o Xbox tinha os gráficos superiores a PS1 e PS2 na época. Sim. Exatamente, Mia. Aliás, uma coisa importante, galera, que a gente tem que falar, o Xbox sempre investiu em hardware para deixar os jogos rodando melhor do que os concorrentes. Eles sempre se preocuparam em deixar o Xbox parecer mais o possível, né, em relação a hardware, com o PC, né? Eles sempre procuraram trazer o melhor, tentaram pelo menos trazer o melhor. Parece que lá em 2013, no Xbox One, os caras deram uma falhadinha, mas enfim, porque já lançaram o console, na minha opinião, meio nas pressas, mas isso aí eu acho que nós vamos chegar ainda, né? No documentário ao longo, talvez não nesse capítulo, mas ao longo eles vão chegar em 2013 também. Então vamos assistindo, depois a gente comenta.
Our goal at the time was to push Windows as a gaming platform.
I always felt like I was doing underdog stuff, and that's actually what I really enjoyed. I enjoyed trying to bring Microsoft from behind in PC games.
After Windows 95 launched, we had to wear these t-shirts that said Microsoft knows games.
You know, it was obvious we didn't really know games, otherwise we wouldn't have had to put it on our shirt, you know what I mean?
Choose your favorite form of world domination in Age of Empires.
Esse eu joguei muito do PC, hein?
We launched Age of Empires.
It was kind of crazy what a fascination that game became.
And it was one of the signature PC strategy games for years.
That was actually a huge success for us, and we started to do some acquisitions, and we were growing our publishing business.
As we started to ship more quality
salve
games,
Fábio
we finally
Leite,
got
Fernando,
to the point where
salve
we were
Elton.
respected in Microsoft, and people were like, okay, Microsoft actually does know what it's doing when it comes to games.
Ed took a broken games business and fixed it and made it profitable and found a way to do it at Microsoft. These are difficult double black belt Aikido corporate moves.
Steering the tiny PC games division into a profitable department had won Ed the trust of Bill Gates. And yet, Fries himself wasn't satisfied.
Our PC market share was growing into the teens, and at the same time we weren't doing anything in the console space, and that to me seemed like a bit of a waste. You know, there was this huge market out there. One day, these guys from the DirectX team walked into my office.
And they pitched me on this thing, the Xbox. And basically what they pitched was a disguised PC. I thought, oh, this is great. This is like a bridge for me to get to the console business.
Viram que interessante, galera? Na verdade, eles criaram um PC disfarçado de console. Vocês viram o que eles falaram ali? Né? O que a Mia acabou de falar, né? Que realmente o Xbox ele sempre focou em trazer os consoles dele mais focado em um hardware próximo ao PC, o que eu tinha falado naquela hora. Inclusive as 3 luzes vermelhas que eles também vão falar depois, né? O Anel da Morte, como eles chamam lá. Aconteceu justamente por ser um console com a estrutura parecida com o PC e alguns outros erros técnicos ali, né? Eles tiveram que fazer, vocês vão ver o que aconteceu. Não vou dar spoiler da história não, tá muito gostoso isso aqui, mano. Vamos lá.
This box that will run a native version of DirectX, which is the part of Windows that's really focused on the game developer, was revolutionary.
It's going to be easy to port to this machine, easy to take my games and make them run. Unlike running on PlayStation at that time or Nintendo machine that were just very alien hardware compared to a PC.
Ed understood all this game development.
Para ele os consoles das concorrentes era estranho, né? Parecia com o PC, ele estava acostumado a trabalhar com o PC.
And if the most creative people did their best work on your platform, that's really good business. That's a good idea.
Basically, I said, you know, I'm in. I like this idea. I want to help you guys.
The DirectX team, these were troublemakers, upstarts. They didn't have these reputations that Ed had as sort of born and bred to work at Microsoft.
They didn't really have any political clout within the company. It was, I think, a big win for them to get me on their side, from my point of view.
This unlikely alliance would bring the Xbox team closer to the biggest test of all, pitching Bill Gates. And that opportunity would come sooner than anyone expected.
When Sony unveiled the PlayStation 2, they started talking about how they were going to be the death of the PC.
A new concept
Ameaça PlayStation aí, galera.
Going into the next century, our EE, the emotion engine.
It was like, what a great name. Holy crap, you know, an
galera,
emotion
olha
engine.
que forte, olha que forte, mano. Deixa eu voltar. Olha isso aqui, galera.
When Sony unveiled the PlayStation 2, they started talking about.
Olha isso aí, galera. Começaram a falar que seria como seria a morte do PC, mano. Caras, olha o que representava o PlayStation pro Xbox, manos. Que na época não existia ainda, né? Quer dizer, não era o Xbox, era o próprio PC, né? Olha o que os caras começaram a cogitar na época, a morte simplesmente do PC. E o PC é com certeza a plataforma de jogos mais forte que se tem, né, em relação a ser ilimitado, né? A ser ilimitado o PC, ele praticamente é ilimitado, né? Tudo quanto é conteúdo tem no PC até hoje. E os caras chegaram a cogitar o fim do PC, mano. A morte do PC por causa dos jogos, né? Olha como a Sony e a Nintendo, né, nessa época a Sony e a Nintendo, a Sega acho que estava para sair do mercado, né, a Sega estava para decretar que não ia mais trabalhar com console, né, mas olha o quanto essas empresas colocaram medo, ameaçaram, né, o PC. Incrível, né, galera?
How they were going to be the death of the PC.
A new concept that we'd like to introduce going into the next century, our EE, the emotion engine.
It was like, what a great name. Holy crap, you know, an emotion engine.
Our new CPU architecture significantly outperforms even the fastest Pentium 3 architecture that's in the market today.
They showed beautiful fighters, models twirling around. They showed 1,000 delicate rose petals falling from the sky to show just how many polygons, just the raw math that this behemoth of a device could process. And guess what? It's got the power of 1,000 suns behind it.
For Microsoft, that really crystallized what the stakes were. And Bill asked the DirectX team to do an analysis of these claims that Sony had made.
As you can imagine, getting on Bill's calendar was next to impossible. I felt a huge sense of pressure to make things happen and make them happen quickly.
Otto and Seamus provided a fantastic breakdown, very technical, what the emotion engine did and did not do, which claims were true, which claims were exaggerated. And at the end, they very audaciously slipped in a little mention of the fact that, you know, we could build a console too. And we put together what we thought at the time was a pretty compelling argument.
Gates had been curious about the viability of a Microsoft console, but it wasn't until mid-March of 1999, just 1 week after the formal announcement of the PS2, that the possibility was finally starting to percolate amongst the company's elite at its annual leadership retreat.
Semiamu was Bill Gates' annual Think Week to think about strategically what sort of projects did they want to greenlight.
One of the programs that you do at this 3-day offsite is a idea generating effort.
We all sat in a room and people could propose a topic for a breakout.
We would write down a question and we'd stand there with our question in front of us.
People moved around and everybody voted what topic they wanted to work on.
And the question I wrote that year was, what if the cable companies like AOL and Sony all got together and they all pooled all the subsidies that they were paying to acquire customers? They could put out a box for free because it'd be so ubiquitous and so highly wanted. That's all I said.
If they could get it into the home as a game console, it would be like the comet that hit the Earth and wiped out the dinosaurs, meaning the Windows PC.
I got a big line of people behind me on that one, including Bill, and off we went to start talking about it for a couple hours.
And so we had a sort of a 2-hour thrash on pros and cons of video game console, what was the state of play with Sony.
And coming out of there, Gates just called it. He wanted me to look into what we should do about it.
Thompson's big question resonated with Gates, and a call went out to the entire company looking for anyone who could answer.
It was sort of an all-points bulletin to senior managers all over the company saying, anybody working on any of this kind of stuff?
And so in March of '99, the DirectX team and every other group in the company that touched games in any way was brought together for a meeting to talk about whether we should have a comprehensive games strategy for the entire company. We took that opportunity to say, listen, not only do we have a perspective on this, we actually have a presentation, a PowerPoint deck that we'd like to share with everybody that says what we, the DirectX team, think the company should do. And obviously that created a great stir at the meeting. Nobody was expecting that. But it was a great surprise to us to find out there were other parts of the company that had aspirations of doing the same thing.
I was running a team in what was known as the Windows CE group. Windows CE was an operating system designed to run devices like handheld computers or even game consoles via a partnership we struck with Sega around their last game console, which was the Dreamcast. We had a pretty capable hardware team.
Some of the guys in that group had worked at 3DO.
Have you experienced the awesome power of the Panasonic Real 3DO system?
And that was a legitimate game console, albeit
Opa,
one
galera, olha aí.
that was not a success.
Olha aí que importante.
Or even
doing the
Aqui, ó,
same
chegou a
thing.
parte.
Comprehensive game strategy for the entire
Chegou a
company.
parte aí
We took that opportunity
sobre
to
a Sega,
say,
né?
listen, not only do we have a perspective on this, we actually have a presentation, a PowerPoint deck that we'd like to share with everybody that says what we, the DirectX team, think the company should do. And obviously that created a great stir at the meeting. Nobody was expecting that. But it was a great surprise to us to find out there were other parts of the company that had aspirations of doing the same thing.
I was running a team in what was known as the Windows CE group. Windows CE was an operating system designed to run devices like handheld computers or even game consoles via a partnership we struck with Sega
fizeram parceria
around
com a
their
Sega, né?
last game console, which was the Dreamcast. We had a pretty capable hardware team.
Some of the guys in that group had worked at 3DO.
Have you experienced the awesome power of the Panasonic Real 3DO system?
And that was a legitimate game console, albeit one that was not a success in the marketplace, but it was a legitimate console play.
Together, we had the hardware expertise, and we had a proposal for what Microsoft should do next in the console space.
Obviously. These guys think they know how to make a game console and that they should do it instead of us. We opened the door and Bill's interested in a game console, so now they're gonna edge us out and they're gonna step through the door.
They were funded, they had a name, they had leadership, they had executive support.
Their argument was, we already know how to do this. What do these kids know? Go with us.
The DirectX team was young and hungry, full of tech know-how and vision. But Windows CE was well known within the company and had experience on their side.
Suddenly, it was a race to try to get the most legitimacy inside of Microsoft, where the winner was going to be the one to bring a game console to market.
And it came to this big battle with Bill.
It was what Microsoft often seemed to do, which is pit two groups of smart people against each other. Classic Bill Gates move.
The stage for the cage match was set. The DirectX and Windows CE teams would battle for the right to make a Microsoft game console in front of founder Bill Gates. To the victors.
Olha só, galera, eu tava mutado aqui o microfone, foi mal, pessoal. Queria fazer um comentário. Olha como o Bill Gates foi esperto. Ele pegou a galera do Windows CE versus a galera do DirectX, colocou eles para apresentarem os melhores projetos e os vencedores aí, né, assumiriam, né, provavelmente os projetos aí do Xbox, né? Mas olha que visão ferrada. O cara simplesmente colocou duas equipes excelentes que estavam trabalhando em jogos para concorrerem dentro da própria empresa uns com os outros, para se esforçarem ao máximo e apresentar o melhor, né, para ele poder trabalhar. Muito inteligente aí, né? Malandro, malandro Bill, hein? Só vai, Bill. O combate aí foi top.
The spoils.
Having Bill in the meeting was always a fantastic thing, as well as increasing the tension at the same time.
Somebody's confused. Somebody's just not thinking.
He was legendary. If you went in and you're full of shit, you get shut down.
No, you don't understand. You guys never understood. You never understood the first thing about this.
So, you know, we tried really hard not to be full of shit.
He is brilliant, but it was a very aggressive, male-dominated culture. Lots of expletives, super, super smart. But man, if you said something stupid,
Well, I'm done.
Round one. From my group's perspective, we felt good. We thought they didn't really understand the console space, so frankly, we discounted them a little bit.
Ready? Fight.
We proposed something that aligned very much with how business was done in the game console market as it existed. You gotta meet the market where it's at.
O Eric falou ali, ó. Eles podiam mandar as duas trabalharem juntas. Cara, mas a ideia do Bill era... Primeiro, acredito que não tinha como o Windows CE trabalhar com o DirectX na época, né? E segundo, a ideia do Bill Gates era extrair da cabeça desses dois times as melhores ideias, entendeu? Se o cara não manjasse, o cara tava fora do projeto, independente do lado que ele estivesse lutando ali, entendeu? E... Então a ideia era puxar o melhor que cada um tinha, não trabalhando junto, e sim, né, ó, o que você tem para oferecer de melhor? Qual que é a sua proposta? O que o seu produto vai fazer de diferente no mercado, entendeu? E, cara, deu bastante certo, né? Deu bastante certo, a gente viu que funcionou. E eu não sei se daria certo trabalhar as duas juntas, né? Talvez ele tivesse essa visão. Não, acho que ou a gente vai ter que escolher o DirectX ou a gente vai ter que escolher o Windows CE, eu acho, né? Quero mandar um salve aí pro meu amigo Bom Jovem, que chegou agora, e o Roberto Moscon, e o Lucas Gonçalves, Moisés Fernandes também, que chegou agora. A edição muito boa, né? Muito bom mesmo, Moisés, muito bom mesmo. Você viu, os caras meteram o Mortal Kombat aí, né? Muito bom.
The WinCE guys were sort of like preaching the model, but the model isn't very interesting.
In their pitch to Bill, as we're sitting there horrified, they're basically talking about recreating the 3D or making a game console similar to everything else that's on the market. And we're like, you know, you don't enter a market and copy what the competition does exactly. You enter a market to disrupt it, to do stuff they can't do.
Windows CE presented, and they talked about this device and blah, blah, blah. And then the DirectX team got up and presented this vision for Xbox.
There were two things in our plan that we thought absolutely critical to the success of Xbox and games on Xbox, which had never been done before on a game console. Number one, a hard drive that would be important not only to save information about the player's state and what accomplishments they had done, but also so they could store large amounts of data somewhere and be able to access and change that over time.
Olha isso que
I
top,
remember
galera.
there was a big debate about should there be a hard drive in it.
Galera, esse lance que eles vão falar agora do hard drive, né, do HD, é fenomenal. Sabe por quê, pessoal? Porque assim, ó, quando a gente tinha lá o Play 1, Play 2, era memory card, era um negocinho assim muito fajuto, muito vagabundo. Até que dava pra aproveitar, que era uma ideia na época que compatível, mas ninguém armazenava jogos em HD e nem tampouco saves, né? Que a princípio parece que a ideia foi, o HD foi não só salvar os jogos, os progressos dos jogos, mas também começar a ideia do download, né? O PlayStation ele sempre foi muito focado em mídia física, né? Ele sempre foi muito, por causa que para quem não sabe, a Sony é uma das grandes desenvolvedoras de CD, né? Do CD. E o Xbox já falou, não, vamos criar algo que armazene os jogos no HD. Então hoje, se a Sony usa o HD e tudo mais, né? Essa ideia começou no Xbox com o grupo DirectX aí, ó, DirectX, né? Como eles falam.
We're not a hard drive in it. We were the not hard drive folks. We didn't see the benefit of it.
Eita.
The second component that we thought was absolutely critical was Ethernet. The Sega Dreamcast was basically the first console in history to have any kind of online component to it. But theirs was dial-up internet using a modem. That was the technology of the time. We realized that
Olha que interessante, o primeiro console que teve a ideia de colocar internet no console foi a Sega, né? Foi o Dreamcast, né? Como eles estão falando aí, ó. Sega Dreamcast foi o primeiro que trouxe essa ideia da internet. Eles aperfeiçoaram a ideia colocando internet de banda larga, porque até então a internet que era compatível com o Sega Dreamcast era a internet de escada, né? Eu já tive internet de escada, eu sou dessa época aí, eu tô ligado que o bagulho era louco. E aí os caras resolveram então trazer a internet banda larga nos aparelhos, né? Que é a internet de alta velocidade.
Speed broadband internet to the television set. We wanted to bet on the future rather than on the present.
The ability to connect machines to each other
Aí não
and
deu
to
pro
the
Windows CE
internet
mesmo.
was a core part of the DNA.
We were
Verdade,
pitching
Alan.
a very
Eu também tô velho,
traditional
mano.
game console. And the Xbox team proposals, I understood it. It sounded to us like, hey, we're going to take a PC and we're going to go build a console out of that. And it just didn't seem credible. It's just not the way the business worked.
Final round. Fight.
These two
Acho
groups
que o
came at the
DirectX
idea
vai dar
of building a
fatality.
game console in very, very different ways. So this meeting got really contentious.
We have to watch these guys like on our plan and tell us it's not going to work and talk to Bill about how game consoles really work. I'm waiting. I'm like, come on, Bill, kill him, shut him down. They're full of shit. He doesn't do it.
I wanted to see the Bill Gates of old. I wanted to see Old Testament Bill Gates, the guy that was famous for throwing people out of meetings and telling them never to come back and telling them that they're the dumbest person in the company. To my horror, Bill sat back and stroked his chin and was very thoughtful. Bill said, well, I think both teams raised some good ideas.
But he didn't seem really that impressed.
In front of that audience, we realized we had to bring out every stop.
The guys from the DirectX side knew that you don't go to a Bill Gates review without showing something really spectacular.
And so leading into this meeting, none of us had slept for like a week.
We made this little device that had relatively old PC technology with a game console-like case on it. And we modified Windows with a hack that like tears open a hole from the bottom up and exposes the hardware.
It was a bunch of PC components and a game controller, and it was literally just held together by chewing gum and tape.
soldering stuff, stripping wires.
And this was like, in the back of our car or like, on the floor in a conference room that we were making this stuff.
An ugly timer on it that showed Windows booting up from power.
Booting a PC 20 years ago would take like 3 minutes. It could take longer. It could take 5, 6 minutes. These guys played with a PC, pulled stuff out that wasn't necessary, changed the BIOS.
And I turned it on, and so it booted in like 3 or 4 seconds.
Bill Gates almost jumped across the table. He was so excited when he saw that.
Bill immediately looked at us.
Why the doesn't Windows boot like that all the time? Yeah. Bill wanted to see it multiple times. He's like, turn it off and do it again. Turn it off and do it again.
Galera, olha isso, mano. Olha isso. Você vê, né? Sem querer, os caras criaram algo inovador. Quer dizer, sem querer não, né? Eles tinham que tirar tudo que era desnecessário pro videogame, né? Pra colocar... Porque, assim, eles estavam baseando-se num PC. E pra carregar o Windows e tal, que tem que carregar um monte de arquivo, um monte de coisa, pra jogar não precisa carregar tudo isso de coisas, né? Então eles foram removendo tudo que não era interessante pra jogo, e aí os caras simplesmente acabaram criando um sistema onde eles conseguiam ligar em 3, 4 segundos o videogame, né? O sistema do Windows. E aí isso impressionou o Bill Gates. O cara ficou de queixo, cara, e falou, como assim, mano? Por que o Windows não é tão rápido assim? Como que vocês fizeram, né? Você vê como valeu a pena colocar os times pra brigar, né? Pra mostrar quem tinha as melhores ideias. Às vezes tem gênios trabalhando com você e você não enxerga, você não percebe, né? E até dá uma oportunidade de se provarem, que foi o que aconteceu aí, pelo que eu tô entendendo.
I saw his jaw drop. This is a guy who knows more than most people in the world will ever possibly know about PCs. Saw a PC, probably for the first time, come on immediately. And we had a software emulator of a PlayStation that had been written for Windows. So you can imagine the executive surprise when we took a PlayStation disc, stuck it in the Xbox prototype, and immediately Tomb Raider came on screen.
Olha a ousadia dos caras, mano.
It bridged the gap of believability. It made the idea of Xbox seem tangible and real and achievable.
The DirectX guys were stuntmen, and they played the game a lot better.
We, frankly, I think, underestimated what they were going to walk into the room with. That meeting wasn't a great outcome for us.
The Windows CE guys literally said, it's not fair, we weren't given the opportunity to make hardware. And somebody said, eliminate him. Well, nobody told them to build hardware, but they did.
Unfortunately for the Windows CE team,
mano.
they brought a PowerPoint to a
Eu
demo
sou
fight.
Team DirectX, hein? Salve, Luizinho, beleza?
Looking back on
Leandro
it now, I
Lamego,
really
salve,
do
salve.
think that Bill looked
Leandro
at us
Mota,
and
Leonardo
saw
Mota,
some
salve,
aspect
salve.
of himself
Genilson
or the early days
Reis,
of
salve,
Microsoft,
salve.
and that's what he thought was going to work.
Bill's reaction was, you guys are proposing that it's doing good things for Windows, and it's based on Windows, and we get Windows in the living room. That all makes sense. You're proposing that we spend $500 million on it. You need to make this presentation to Steve.
How much do you think this advanced operating environment is worth? Wait just 1 minute before you answer. Watch as
Steve is one of the most enthusiastic and energetic people I have ever met in my life. That energy and enthusiasm that you see on stage is 100% authentic.
At the time, if the biggest fan of Xbox was Bill Gates, the biggest opponent was Steve Ballmer.
Steve, as a good businessman, liked to make money. He liked, big, bold bets, but he liked big, bold bets that would pay off.
This was right at the time when Bill was transitioning the CEO role to Steve. And they had already agreed for a couple years that if Bill came up with some crazy idea that cost a lot of money, that Steve should get a chance to say yes or no on it first. And that led into this final meeting where we really had quite a large group of executives across the company.
The room was packed. There were a lot of different constituencies there, all the way from the field sales force to the most technical side of the company. You had a lot of people very, very interested.
Steve's a big guy, and Bill's in there, and you're in there with these two super famous guys who hold your destiny, and Steve is really upset that we wanted to take this risk.
Ballmer understood very well where Microsoft's bread was buttered and where the money came from. We were a company known for productivity software. He didn't want some video game, or even the fact that we made video games, to threaten the very lifeblood of the company.
Steve looked at the Xbox idea and saw insanity. He went to his whiteboard and he said, okay, what's this gonna cost? What's the hard drive gonna cost? What's the Ethernet port gonna cost? What's the graphics chip gonna cost? And he totaled it all up and said, there's no way you guys, what's your reserve for returns? Reserve for returns, what does that mean? Well, we freely admitted that we didn't understand the first thing about hardware, but we were gamers and we were game developers. Our entire careers have been built around games.
Galera, isso que eu admiro no Xbox. Isso que eu acho fenomenal no Xbox. São gamers fazendo videogame, caras. Isso eu acho incrível, mano. Você pega, por exemplo, o Phil Spencer, né? Phil Spencer é um gamer, pô. Você olha lá, o cara tá sempre jogando, entendeu? E foi o que o cara falou ali agora, né? A gente sempre gostou, a gente sempre jogou, a gente era gamer fazendo videogame. Isso é uma coisa que o Xbox tem. Não é um monte de engravatado, tá ligado? Fazendo negócios. Tem os engravatados, obviamente toda empresa precisa do engravatado, né? Mas quem produz o trabalho, quem faz, quem põe a mão na massa são os gamers dentro do Xbox. Isso é uma coisa que eu admiro demais, manos. Quero aproveitar a pausa aqui e mandar um salve pro Ryan Oliveira. O Genilson Reis disse que tem um Pentium 3 até hoje, mas não roda no nível do Xbox nenhum game. Ah, sim, claro. Naquela época era outro tipo de jogo também, né? Um salve para o Kies Pereira, que tá dizendo aqui, parabéns pelos conteúdos que você traz para o canal. Muito obrigado mesmo. O Fred Goulart deu salve aí pra galera, um salve para você também. É muito bom, aliados, mostrar o pessoal conhecer direito antes de falar. Exatamente, Mia, exatamente. Às vezes a galera não conhece a história do Xbox, é muito gostoso a gente ver, né, o que é o Xbox de verdade. Não é, como eu já disse, não é um monte de engravatado fazendo videogame só pra ganhar dinheiro. Claro que a empresa ganha dinheiro com isso, claro que a empresa vive disso, e os lucros são a coisa mais importante para a empresa, mas existem pessoas que são apaixonadas por videogame que estão aonde? No Xbox fazendo jogo para nós. Vamos lá, vamos continuar.
We knew that 3D gaming was taking off and online gaming was just around the corner. And the best and brightest in the game development world, they were moving all their thinking from the PC to consoles. We had the opportunity to go create something that was going to take all of the equity, all the goodwill, all the technology, and all of the programming tools that had ever been created to make Windows applications and carry it forward to the living room. And that was the product that we were proposing, Xbox.
Looking back at that moment, what Steve and Bill were seeing was the future passing Microsoft by. You know, Microsoft was thought of as this dominant company of the era, but success or even survival was anything but preordained. If Microsoft didn't grab this opportunity, that Microsoft would be on the wrong side of the future of tech.
It made everybody step back for a second and think.
The console business was something that we needed to seize. And I think that was where Bill and Steve realized that they needed to move forward with Xbox.
An incredibly electrifying moment.
We'd finally convinced Steve. Bill was convinced.
They've done an outstanding job so far, haven't they?
I think Bill did have a view that software running on hardware in a family room could really bring some unique experiences into the home. We could start with video games, but it could go many directions from there.
It was really an opportunity to recapture the soul that Microsoft had at the beginning, to create that revolution, to create that new platform.
We were going to do something no one else had done. We were going to launch a console from a software company. Microsoft had done nothing like that before.
And then it became clear that there was just some really big challenges for us.
At the beginning, it was about credibility.
We had a task ahead of us to ensure that we were taken seriously in the game industry.
This equation of power, performance, and price. You have to come correct on every single part of that, you know, to be successful.
There were so many tasks that had to be done on both the hardware and software side. We realized that we needed to have a leader. It was clear to all of us that that person was Rick Thompson. He had asked the best questions, the most insightful questions. We wanted him to be part of the answers.
So Rick was brought in as the seasoned senior executive who had experience in hardware with peripherals, mice and keyboards, and he had to construct a plan and a go-forward strategy.
My comment at the time was, I'm not big enough for this job. But a couple days later, Steve Ballmer calls me into his office and says, let's get this straight between the two of us. This is your job now.
You're making a big splash. You say you're getting into this consumer market. You know, if that doesn't work out well, it could really give the company a huge black eye, and that would be very difficult to recover from.
The risk here is enormous, the amount of money we could lose on this project. And for me, it was fear, uncertainty, and doubt, because you got a business guy who's gonna try to figure out a business model with my little team of people who helped me with the hardware business. You got 4 people coming over from DirectX. None of us actually knew the rules of the game that we're playing. And we basically just stood there and looked at each other and said, oh, like, now what do we do?
O que vamos fazer agora? Meu Deus do céu, muito bom, caras, muito bom, muito bom, muito bom. Galera, eu não vou deixar tocar o áudio aí pra não dar BO aí, eu não sei se essa música tem direitos autorais. A primeira parte, o primeiro capítulo vai estar tão gostoso, caras, que eu vou continuar, mano, eu vou continuar. Tá muito bom isso aqui, isso é louco, mano. Meu Deus do céu, muito bom, né? Como pode, né, caras? Que incrível, mano. Vamos ver se a gente acha que o capítulo 2 agora, aqui ó, capítulo 2. Capítulo 2 tem 39 minutos, bora assistir, que tá gostoso demais. O que vocês estão... Deixa eu fazer uma pausa pra ouvir o que vocês estão achando, né? Deixa eu só ver um negócio, cadê a legenda? Ah, tá, a legenda tá aí, não vamos ficar sem legenda, senão fica ruim, né? O pai não manja do inglês, não. Deixa eu ver o que vocês estão achando do documentário, né, galera? É um verdadeiro evento, né? É um verdadeiro evento esse documentário. Pra mim, pelo menos, tá incrível demais, mano. O Fernando Costa falou ali, ó, de gamer pra gamer, o que poderia dar errado? Exatamente. E assim, né, manos, conseguiu conquistar o seu espaço. Vocês vão ver que não foi fácil a história do Xbox, né? Quanto dinheiro perdeu, quanto dinheiro teve que investir, porque assim, ó, o legal desse documentário aí nessa primeira capítulo é que mostra que a galera do DirectX, eles não tinham a noção da grana, eles sabiam o que era para ser feito, mas não sabiam o tamanho do investimento que tinha que ser feito, né? Então quando chegou nos engravatados, os engravatados ficaram preocupados, mas e aí? Quanto vai custar o modem lá para você colocar a internet no negócio? Quanto vai custar esse HD aí? E aí, como é que a gente vai fazer para vender isso daí? Também tem que olhar esse lado. Uma empresa, como eu disse para vocês, é isso, né? Mas o legal é que a Microsoft ouve o gamer, né? Tanto dentro quanto fora da Microsoft, né? O Xbox sempre ouve o gamer também. O Agnus falou que tá bom demais, o Bytrid falou que tá bom demais, o Eric Cardoso tá achando excelente também, bom demais. E tá muito ferrado, muito bom, né? O Agnus Prime usou uma expressão F ali, né? Que a gente sabe o que é. O Diego Belo falou, muito show, pra quem gosta de games é surreal ver tudo do início. Exatamente, Diego Belo, exatamente. O Leandro Lamego falou que tá curtindo, o Alan disse, muito bom, mas quero ver o que eles vão falar daquele mané que assumiu o Xbox antes do... Ah, vai chegar, Alan, vai chegar. O Hermano Bonavides falou que tá empolgante, sim. O Júnior Francisco pediu pra continuar. Vamos lá, vamos que vamos. Então, galera, só vamos, galera, pra não perder o ritmo que tá muito gostoso, pra não perder o clima aí. Vamos lá.
The idea that Microsoft could ever compete with Sony or Nintendo.
Microsoft is going to make a game console.
It was seen as a bit of a joke.
Might as well call it Nerdbox, right?
We needed to prove our credibility. This thing is going to be the most badass thing you can imagine.
Dude, we need a metal X, and it's got to have a green eye, you know, shooting a laser out. I want it to blind people.
The game developers are not going to be tolerant of any level of bull at all.
I opened up the first machine, I'm like, what the... Oh my God, like what happened in there?
Seamus is backstage soldering as the auditorium is filling up.
And then it's in front of the boss. The boss is coming on.
The Microsoft brand is on the line, the Microsoft name's on the line.
Bill's not gonna be happy.
And it was terrifying.
He's screaming at us. You guys have lied to me. You guys have like played me for a fool.
And he says, this is a insult to everything I've accomplished at this company.
It was terrifying. thought my career was over.
There's a new contender in the video game wars.
Xbox is going to be the future.
Truly the future of video games.
Xbox. Taking over the living room.
Limitless, connected digital entertainment.
You guys never understood.
The company is going to face fierce competition.
Sniper!
It's a ticking time bomb.
Makes me very nervous to actually play this for you.
Xbox getting a major overhaul. A bold vision for the future of gaming.
Meet the Microsoft Mouse Line. There's a mouse for everyone, whether you're an expert or first-time buyer. Let's start with the basics.
I joined the hardware group back in 1987. I ran it for 13 years, hired 300 people into the group, and by 1999, we were doing $600 million worth of business a year.
Rick was working for me running our hardware business. Think mice, keyboards, we had some speakers, we had this thing called Interactive Barney.
That's super duper.
At some point, Steve Ballmer shows up and says, Rick's gonna go do this business exploration. I want you to help sort of supervise and support him.
Steve Ballmer tells me Xbox is my new job and is very convincing about it. Having been in hardware all of my career at Microsoft, I need to understand how this is going to be a good business for us.
Do you ever want to make hardware?
If you want to be a great software company, you have to be only a software company. You can't dabble in other things.
The idea of building a game console from scratch, the risk here was enormous.
We really understand what it is to be gamers, but we're panicking, like we have to figure out how to build the hardware.
Okay, we had no idea what we were doing. None. Like, couldn't have been less qualified to build a console.
Everything about making a console is hard, including taking an upfront loss on the hardware. Sony, Sega, Nintendo, they design their own hardware, they manufacture it themselves, and they sell it at a loss and make a profit on games. And that's how the business model works. So for Microsoft, that is an insane business to get into.
Our P&L said we were going to lose $2 billion for the privilege of maybe later on, somewhere way down the road, we'll make money. And once you started it, with all the commitments that you make trying to convince the game developers to make Xbox games, you can't really stop it.
What have you done? What madness has claimed you?
We made it the point to Steve Ballmer to say, if you guys start this thing, don't come back 6 months from now and say it hurts too much.
Any new console hoping to have even a chance of success needed to win over a group of notoriously tough critics, game developers. And getting past those gatekeepers would require Microsoft to make a flawless debut at the world's largest game developer conference, GDC.
Games sell consoles, and so in order to sell consoles, we had to win the hearts and minds of the developers.
The only place I think we could have ever announced Xbox was GDC.
The next GDC would take place.
Olha isso aqui que o cara falou, galera. Games vendem consoles, né? E para vender consoles tinha que atrair os desenvolvedores. Foi exatamente o que a Sony fez, né? Antigamente a Sony fazia. Foi exatamente isso. Ela atraiu. Deixa eu só fazer uma pausa aqui enquanto eu comento com vocês rapidinho, galera. Mexendo no negócio aqui em off. Ela atraiu, né? Bastante desenvolvedoras com propostas únicas, né? Foi exatamente o que a Sony fez, né, com o PlayStation, e o Xbox acabou fazendo também depois, né, atraindo e tal, fora a questão dos jogos que a própria empresa desenvolveu e tudo mais. Mas vocês veem como é importante, né, que os jogos eles são importantes para vender consoles também. Então a gente tem que entender, mesmo eu que muitas vezes não concordo tanto com exclusividade, acho que seria legal se todo mundo pudesse jogar e tudo mais, mesmo eu, galera, fico relutante, né, sobre a questão dos exclusivos, porque acaba que sim, exclusivo é algo muito importante para uma empresa. Galera, rapidinho, tô fazendo uma pausa que eu tô mexendo uma coisa em off, tá? Deu um probleminha técnico aqui em off, eu tô resolvendo, mas a gente já retoma aí. Né, deixa eu só ver aqui. Cara, se eu tô tendo um probleminha, deixa eu mexer aqui. Peraí. Editar. Rapidinho, tá, galera? Deixa eu ver. A gente já retoma. Nossa, deu uma bagunça aqui, galera, porque agora mudou o OBS. E aí tá me dando um certo trabalho pra resolver algumas coisas aqui. Inclusive, mano... Caramba, tá bem... Nossa, cara, que coisa. Que coisa. Eu vou pedir depois para os caras verem isso aqui pra mim. O YouTube vê isso aqui pra mim. Vocês acreditam que nem monetizada a minha live está, né? Por causa desses problemas que deu aí. E tá tendo um erro de interpretação do YouTube quanto ao conteúdo. A gente já não ganha nada quase, né? Ganha pouco. Mas enfim. Beleza, já resolvi aqui. Né? O que eu... Pelo menos melhorei algumas coisas aqui em off. Beleza? Vamos voltar então para a nossa live aí. Focar aqui. Prestar atenção agora no conteúdo aí. Então, legal, né? Agora eles vão falar dessa parte aí de conquistar os desenvolvedores de jogos. Isso é muito importante. E eles vão falar da GDC de março do ano 2000.
In March of 2000, so the Xbox team had only 11 months to design and deliver a functioning prototype.
Time is running out for Microsoft to get on the board. If they didn't announce by GDC 2000, they were going to be ceding too much of the playing field to Sony. They had to do it.
And there was still one massive problem to solve. Who was going to build the console hardware? The plan had never been for Microsoft to do it alone.
The only way that we could actually get Xbox made properly was to go to the people that were really good at building hardware.
Rick was trying like hell to find somebody to partner with us. People had expertise that he knew we didn't have.
Companies like Dell and Compaq and NEC and Toshiba. We start these meetings and most of the guys would look at me and go, who are you? And should I believe you or not? And I'm like, no, really, we're gonna do this.
And the OEMs all, laughed in his face. Like, we understand enough about the console business to know that all the money is made on the software. And you're coming to us and asking us just to make the hardware while you make the software. We're not that dumb.
Rick's point of view was, we have no chance of doing this ourselves. And so then the question would be...
Que legal, eles tiveram problemas em conseguir conquistar, né, empresas que ajudassem a desenvolver o hardware dos consoles, porque eles sabiam que dava dinheiro na época. Isso é até hoje, tá, pessoal? Hoje o hardware tá um pouco mais lucrativo, né? Tá lucrativo hoje, mas antigamente praticamente a empresa pagava, né? A Sony, a Nintendo, qualquer outra pagava para você jogar no console, porque depois eles recuperavam isso vendendo jogos na plataforma. Isso acontece até hoje e eles não conseguiram ninguém ali a princípio, né? Para poder financiar, ajudar a fazer aí esse lance do hardware, né? Empresas que trabalhavam com hardware não queriam, porque falava, a gente sabe que o lucro vem do software, por que a gente vai investir em vocês aí que estão querendo trazer o hardware, né?
How do we partner with Nintendo, or maybe we should partner with Sega?
Sega seemed like a natural choice because of Microsoft's previous collaboration on the Dreamcast. But there was pushback against the partnership. Dreamcast had never been competitive with Sony, and Xbox needed to be unlike anything Microsoft had tried before. That left one last great hope.
With Nintendo's 64-bit technology, now Mario lives in a 3D world, and you can make him go wherever you want.
As we began to understand the business model, we really appreciated Nintendo. People don't buy consoles, they buy games. They want to play Mario, they want to play Pokemon, they want to play Zelda.
Accepting the award for Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, will be Shigeru Miyamoto.
And you look at Nintendo and you find the Spielberg of the video game industry in Miyamoto and you go, wow, this guy's unbelievable.
Thank you very much.
I knew I could convince Microsoft to outright buy Nintendo. I mean, it would be an amazing accomplishment because it's the national treasure of Japan.
So if you buy Nintendo, you get credibility in the Japanese market. You maybe even get Miyamoto.
Was there a way to make that happen? Because that would give us instant credibility.
If Microsoft were to acquire Nintendo, they would have gotten two things. One was the hardware, and second is a massive games portfolio.
From Rick's point of view, if you could acquire Nintendo, you would immediately have access to the best game library in the world, full stop. So I made...
Galera, agora vamos falar aqui. Vocês viram que eles estão falando aí de comprar Nintendo. Vocês imaginam o que seria do futuro dos jogos se eles comprassem a Nintendo, manos. Se eles conseguissem comprar a Nintendo, qual seria o futuro do... Como seriam os jogos hoje? Como seria o Xbox hoje? O Xbox Nintendo, mano. A gente já teve esse quase acontecimento com o PlayStation, né? Naquela fusão, naquela união que o PlayStation ia fazer com a Nintendo. Não sei se vocês sabem da história, mas a Nintendo teve uma parceria com o PlayStation para poder fazer o primeiro Nintendo de CD. Só que aí a Nintendo viu que ia ficar devendo royalties para a Sony sempre, porque a Sony tinha o direito sobre a questão dos CDs, né? Acabou dropando da ideia, e aí o PlayStation nasceu desse pé na bunda, vamos assim dizer, que a Nintendo deu no PlayStation. Inclusive o presidente do PlayStation na época ficou bem pé da vida e falou: agora a gente vai fazer o nosso console só de raiva. E, inclusive teve uma briga judicial, né, que eu ouvi dizer sobre uma briga judicial entre a Nintendo e o PlayStation por causa do nome, né, porque o nome seria Nintendo PlayStation, né, e aí parece que rolou uma briga judicial quando o PlayStation lançou o PlayStation, só que aí o PlayStation juntou a palavra PlayStation, né, e aí o processo não foi válido porque, vocês patentearam PlayStation e não PlayStation tudo junto, entendeu? Estação de jogo tudo junto. Então são curiosidades da história, né, do videogame. E os caras foram tentar comprar a Nintendo, mas o Leandro Barbosa falou assim: caramba, mas comprar a Nintendo, cara, ele deu ruim isso daí. Essa ideia deles deu ruim, porque os caras... Uma coisa que eles falaram ali é importante. Eles falaram que a Nintendo era um tesouro nacional do Japão, né? Comprar a Nintendo ia revolucionar o Xbox, ia simplesmente trazer todo o portfólio de jogos da Nintendo pro Xbox, e ainda iam ter quem sabia fazer hardware na época, né? Ia ter quem desenvolvesse o hardware para eles, em massa, em quantidade e tal. Então seria incrível mesmo. Mas vocês vão ver a reação, né? Eu já sei a reação, já que eu já acompanhei esse negócio aí. Vocês vão ver a reação aí na hora da compra e como que os caras abordaram, que é o pior, mano. Como que os caras abordaram a Nintendo? Acho que eles vão falar sobre isso. Vocês vão ver só, mano. Vamos lá.
Made an introduction to the people that ran Nintendo of America. Told them what we were interested in, and then we made a trip to Kyoto.
And who do you think you are barging into my office?
But I could tell from the first meeting that there wasn't a chance this was going to happen. They were highly skeptical.
Guards!
They were not even remotely interested in selling the business. I never got past square one on trying to acquire them.
That to me is the pivotal point for Xbox. Oh my gosh, we're actually gonna do this ourselves. And that scared the crap out of us. Because once it became a do-it-ourselves project, now the Microsoft brand is on the line, the Microsoft name's on the line, it's gonna be big and public. We're gonna have to do a lot of things new, we're gonna do hardware at scale. We are no longer in the Microsoft playbook.
An unprecedented challenge called for some change-ups and new additions to the team. Ted, Nat, and Otto left for other pursuits, while Thompson brought on someone new. Someone known within Microsoft for delivering complex projects against impossible deadlines.
One day, this guy comes into my office and he sits down and I'm like, who are you? And he says, I'm Jay Out. I said, who's Jay Out? And he looks at me like, everybody knows who I am, right?
We're really on the cusp of this digital entertainment revolution. So while for 25 years now, Microsoft prided itself on making the world more productive, now our challenge is to blend that with making the world less productive, you know?
He was seen as a futurist that had a lot of credibility internally at Microsoft.
There was, the famous internet memo.
He sent Bill Gates this memo that basically said, hey, Bill, we gotta wake up because this thing called the internet is coming and it is going to transform commerce, it's gonna transform society, and it's going to be powered by broadband connections. And so we made a huge, bold bet by putting a broadband connection in the back of the Xbox. Everybody thought we were nuts.
You have to remember, back in 1999, less than 5% of the US households even had broadband.
But I remember Jay saying, we're gonna bet on the future, not against it. He had a vision for where online gaming could go and what Xbox could become. And Bill paid attention to Jay.
Well, it's very hip to be on the internet right now.
With the right team together, Xbox needed the right operating system, and that was a little tricky. And political.
It's just amazing how popular PCs are.
Windows had been the catalyst for Microsoft's meteoric rise.
Games, word processors, calculators, calendars, all running faster than ever.
Bill Gates had been won over to the team's pitch on the understanding that Windows would power Xbox. But the team knew that Xbox needed to be leaner than a PC. Windows was an all-purpose tank. Xbox needed a street racer.
One of the things that makes Windows great is that you can do lots of things at once. You can be running Word next to Excel, next to IM, next to Photoshop.
And so the idea was, if we're going to put a video game console in the living room, it's going to run Windows.
Once or twice a week, we'd get pings from all sorts of different groups around Microsoft. Office was kind of the notorious one, saying, hey, I hear we're doing a console. I hear it's going to run Windows. What do I have to do to get a build of Office running on it? I bet people would like to edit their Word documents while sitting on the couch. What's the rating of this? Okay, so we had to do two things. One, we had to tell these groups off. That is not what this is. If you actually think people want to sit back on their couch doing spreadsheets, it's not going to happen. At the same time, we needed a lot of code from these groups. So we had to tell them off nicely.
You're dismissed.
The services that Windows provides are really valuable, but the most important thing for games is speed. If you have an operating system taking 15% of the CPU and half the disk, you're dead.
One possible solution was to use just the Windows NT kernel, essentially the brain of the operating system. This would leave more space and flexibility for developers to program games. There was just one problem with that solution. The Xbox team didn't have access to that kernel, and the Windows team wasn't about to share it.
Here we are in the computer room that holds all of our server machines.
If we'd have gone and asked the Windows team, they would have insisted that we take Windows as is, no modifications, subject to their approval, and we just could not bring that baggage over. So we had to steal it. We stole it. We stole it, yes.
I have it running on this machine here.
We actually grabbed it at night off of...
Cara, olha que coisa absurda, né? Olha que coisa absurda. O pessoal do Windows não estavam querendo colaborar, né, com a ideia do Xbox, e os caras tiveram que roubar, né, a forma de fazer isso, né? Vocês veem como uma empresa, ela é tão gigante, é tão grande. Opa, beleza, Agros, tamo junto, um abraço, meu querido. A empresa é tão gigante que ela compete com ela mesma, né, nos bastidores. É um negócio assim absurdo, né? E como a galera era meio desunida, né? Eles não queriam desistir do Windows, queria ficar com o Windows, né, a qualquer preço, e não queria que se tornasse um console de videogame, porque eles queriam preservar aquilo ali que eles tinham no sistema deles lá, enfim. Complicado, né?
The server when no one was looking. About 3 weeks before a major Windows release was going to happen, we brought it back and just started hacking and slashing stuff out of it. We had to refactor and cleave off functionality to make this box so tuned that the games could be brilliant. What started out as a 4.5 megabyte working set for the kernel got that down to about 200K. So a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what Windows is actually made it over to Xbox.
You could call this the evolutionary approach.
It becomes clear that what we're going to do is not what Bill and Steve thought they had approved.
Xbox would have the heritage of Windows, but not actually Windows itself.
The new operating system was streamlined, but nothing like the Windows-powered version the team had pitched to win the technology bake-off against Windows CE. With GDC 2000 just 1 month away, for Thompson and the team, it was the moment of truth. Time to call one final meeting. A do-or-die presentation to Bill Gates on Valentine's Day to ask if he could open his heart to a Windows Lite version of Xbox.
We had to go to Bill and tell him that what he wanted most out of this, he was not going to get. This wasn't going to run Windows.
I can't imagine how it could be better.
Oh, Bill's not going to be happy.
This was the final meeting to either approve the Xbox or cancel it. One of the highest stakes meetings I was at my whole time at Microsoft.
Which is the Valentine's Day Massacre. It's like a 4:30 meeting. Rick, Thompson, myself, Ed Freeze, Jay Allard are the 4 Xbox folks there. Steve's there.
There was a whole outer group of people too. So this room was packed.
Well, about 15 minutes late, Bill walks in.
He's holding the PowerPoint presentation, and he walks up to the table and he throws it down on the table and he says, "This is a insult to everything I've accomplished at this company."
Leans across at me and says, "Why are you trying to kill Windows?"
You guys have lied to me. You guys have like played me for a fool.
I start to try to argue for this, why we can't have the normal version of Windows. Bill doesn't want any of it. He doesn't want to hear it. He yells at me, he shuts me down.
You got a lot of alphas in the room and all alpha males, and so there's a lot of pounding the table and you're wrong, I'm right.
By then Jay is up, he's ready to fight, and so then Jay goes in, then Robbie tries to talk to Bill, and Bill yells at Robbie.
If I'd had glasses on, I would have needed windshield wipers on him because he was spitting at us so hard and so fast.
Bill would yell at us for a while about these different things, and then Ballmer would take over on the business case, and the business case looked terrible.
By now, and the reason it's called the Valentine's Day Massacre is because all Valentine's Day activities are now off.
The candles at home, they're melting, and we're all missing dinner.
And the meeting gets to this sort of crescendo. And I said, okay, well, then let's not do it. We haven't announced anything. So that led to another hour.
And then somebody says, what about Sony?
Microsoft had owned the den and the office.
How cool!
Galera, olha que incrível, mano. Olha que incrível. Os caras arregaçaram o Bill... Cara, que coisa, mano. O Bill arregaçou os caras, falou um monte, né? O Bill Gates falou um monte pros caras, tal, pá, que vocês estão querendo acabar com o Windows, como vocês fazem uma coisa dessa, não sei o que, não sei o que, não sei o que. Aí eles falam, não, beleza, a gente não publicou nada, ninguém sabe, né, do projeto, ele é secreto, não vai rolar, tranquilo, tranquilo. Alguém na sala pega e diz assim, mas e a Sony? E quanto à Sony? O que, né? E agora? O que a gente vai fazer com o concorrente? Vocês estão vendo quando eu falo aqui no canal que a concorrência é importante, e é importante a gente falar da Sony, falar da Nintendo, falar da Sega, falar de quem quer que seja, não só de Xbox, porque a concorrência moveu a Microsoft. Foi a concorrência que fez a Microsoft refletir, né, sobre o Xbox. Então, interessante isso daí, hein? E aí, Xbox, salve, salve, bufador, salve, salve. O NZX, cheguei agora, o que tá acontecendo na live? Sim, tá acontecendo um mega documentário importantíssimo, um evento, né, praticamente aí do Xbox, que a gente tá assistindo junto e reagindo aqui em tempo real. Eu tô aqui impressionado com as histórias sobre o Xbox. Eles só não falaram como eles tentaram pegar a Nintendo, né, quando eles tentaram comprar a Nintendo. Os caras chegaram no escritório da Nintendo lá diante dos japoneses e falaram assim, olha, que tal a gente fazer cuidar dos jogos e vocês cuidarem do hardware para nós, né? A gente compra vocês continuam fazendo hardware e tal, e deixa os jogos com a gente, né? Ou deixa o hardware com a gente, uma coisa assim. Aí os japoneses dizem que deram risada, mas os caras gargalhavam na cara dos caras que foram fazer as propostas. Isso eles não falaram nesse documentário, né? Eu achei que eles fossem falar. Mas vamos lá, vamos continuar. Ó, o Thiago Fagundes falou ali, grande PlayStation. Pois é, graças ao PlayStation existe Xbox, né, galera? Porque foi o contraponto na época que preocupava, né, que entre aspas ameaçava, né, o PC, né, que era onde o Xbox, não, a Microsoft dominava, né?
Sony owning the rest of the home is offensive to Bill. But the Xbox, it's the antithesis of everything that Microsoft is. It takes all of the hardware burden onto us, so it's really hard to make business sense of it. That's equally offensive. And what's going on with Bill and Steve was figuring out which of those was least offensive to them.
Bill kind of pauses and he thinks and he says, I think we should do this. And Ballmer's like, yeah, we should.
Caras, olha isso, mano. Uma frase. Mas e a Sony? Tipo, o cara, não, vocês não vão fazer o bagulho, não vai acontecer, não sei o quê. Tá bom, tudo bem, beleza, mas e a Sony? E o PlayStation? Aí os caras falaram, acho que a gente tem que fazer isso. Muito bom, mano. Esse documentário
do
tá muito
this.
bom.
And then they start getting excited and it starts going back and forth. We should do this. We should let these guys do this. Bill's like, okay, we're gonna give you guys everything you asked for. Really want you to be successful in this project. You have all my support. And that part of the meeting took 5 minutes. And I turned to Robbie. I'm like, Robbie, that was the weirdest meeting I've been in at 15 years at this company.
All I remember is Kevin Bacchus coming by and basically saying, we're doing it, we're doing it.
The system was going to get built. Hundreds of millions of dollars would be spent marketing it.
Even Bomber said, once we say yes to this, we're saying yes to this. This is real. This is as real as it gets right now. We're going to book the speech at GDC.
Bill Gates was going to go on stage in front of the world and announce it.
And it became very real when Rick Thompson sent an email saying that Xbox had been approved for an initial funding of $1 billion.
bilhãozinho de dólares.
With $1 billion on the line and less than a month left until
menos de mês,
Xbox's big debut had more riding on it than ever. The team set to work creating a prototype and recruiting game developers to the platform. A monumental task for a software company that didn't have much street cred.
When it came to console gaming in the late 90s, there was no perception of Microsoft. They weren't in the picture. But when it came to the PC side of gaming, Microsoft had a reputation.
Ed Freeze had built Microsoft Game Studios and kind of organized the studio structure by genre. We had like a role-playing studio. We had a sports studio.
We were doing golf. We had a basketball title and we had a baseball title.
But it was around the time we shipped Age of Empires that we started to really get respect.
You've built a glorious empire.
Esse daí foi top, hein? Age of
Age
Empires.
was a great game. It was a ton of fun. Everyone loved
Esse
it.
foi fenomenal,
Age of Empires is a grand franchise. But if you
Joguei
talk to
demais
somebody
no
that likes
PC,
to play Super Mario Brothers, it's a really kind of a different customer entirely. And I think that they didn't necessarily view Microsoft as being in the gaming business.
Here we go!
To recruit console game developers to its unproven platform, Microsoft had to innovate development tools that would rival the competition, making game developers an offer they couldn't refuse.
We were all about what we were giving the game developers to work with to create the greatest games ever made.
The PS2 was really, really unfriendly environment to developers. Seamus Blackley and Kevin Bacchus and Ed Freeze, they were saying, we're gonna fix this. So more of the money is going on the screen, not just trying to figure out the convoluted hardware. And that was like, really? I mean, it was like oxygen.
This was going to do things that the PlayStation can't, which meant to me we could tell more stories, create characters that people care about, and create worlds that would be very difficult to do on the PlayStation. It's time.
We know at this point we're heading toward Xbox announcement at GDC. Game developers have to be excited so that they could talk to their other friends in the games industry and tell them, you know what? Xbox is legit.
The innovations offered in the Xbox created a promising future for console game developers. But to deliver that future, Microsoft still needed to complete a working prototype to debut on stage at the Game Developers Conference.
When Microsoft first started talking about doing a game console, everybody's willing to listen, but you need to see it.
We had to create a prototype game console that was obviously not going to be the final design of the hardware because we didn't know what Xbox was ultimately going to look like, but at the same time, looked nothing like a PC.
I had started working with the hardware guys' rapid prototyping group, which was literally in the parking garage. And they had like built a temporary structure in a bunch of parking spaces and like made it like a little office.
So I went to this area where the artists were, and they were having a remote control car race in the office. Around the desks, going right around. And that's how I met Horace Luke.
In a lot of ways, I work very scattermind. I don't really work on a linear path. Most of my days spent with markers and paper and just doodling.
I remember the guys coming in about 6 or 7 in the evening when everybody's leaving the office with this big motherboard from the 90s. This gigantic board that had all these PCI slots on it and said, put this into something that is presentable on stage. And I still remember staring at it going, what do I do with this thing? The traditional Microsoft product was very ergonomic-centric. The mouse, the keyboard. But with the Xbox, it was very different. It was about storytelling.
There's a lot of people focused on what's this set-top box gonna look like in my living room. But that wasn't what we cared about. Horace was really interested in what was happening when you got sucked through that screen.
The role of the designer, it was how to tell the story at a glance. That Microsoft is about to go into a space that is brand new to what Microsoft was accustomed to. Telling people that this thing is going to be the most badass thing you can imagine.
I would go down and visit Horace, and there would be scraps of prototype drawings and other pieces of vision work that he would have.
The whole idea was his nuclear reactor almost, trying to hold this energy that's inside that is so intense.
He's like, dude, we need a metal X, and it's got to have a green eye, you know, shooting a laser out.
And he's always gonna use sound effects, so he's gonna be like...
I want it to blind people, because that's kind of how Horace would talk about these things.
Que engraçado como que ele fala as coisas.
That sense of escape and that sense of capability and power is what we try to create with this green portal. And inside there, everything is possible. That was how we wanted people to feel when it's on stage.
You could have shown up to GDC and plugged in a PC and tried to tell people it was a console, and not a single person in that audience, I don't even think we would have believed that that was really going to be a console. So we knew we needed to show something beautiful.
People got to be able to tell in an instinct that this thing is called Xbox.
What we ended up building was a 40-pound machined aluminum X that had been buffed to a chrome finish.
These big, beautiful, shiny chrome X's. They were like these incredible sports cars.
We ended up taking literally a solid hunk of aluminum and carved it with a 6-axis CNC machine. That box took 2 weeks to carve and 1 week to polish.
Building those metal X's was very trying.
Drew and I just, after work, you know, get a can of kerosene, get a rag, and just keep buffing it. Rub, rub, rub until that thing was polished.
Somebody brought it out into a meeting and took a towel off of it and showed it to us, and I was like, that can't be in people's living rooms. And everyone's like, calm down, it's a concept.
And I'm like, okay, awesome about the green eye. How am I gonna fit the components in there? And what we ended up doing is, if you look at a PC, there's like this main motherboard, so we stuck the motherboard at this, you know, on like one angle.
We had to shave off the edge of the motherboard because it just didn't fit.
We soldered the hardware together ourselves and borrowed space in the lab.
You know, I'm sure people looked at that and they're like, whoa, it's like this polished X, it's got this, you know, amazing green eye. But it was the world's messiest PC build. Like, it was components like just jammed in there. And you're like, is it gonna work? Oh, well, you know, work this time. I guess that's the one we'll take with us to GDC.
It's sometimes possible to forget about the people who actually make the games. And so we're here in San Jose, California for the Game Developers Conference to remind ourselves that without these people, we'd still be playing checkers.
Announcing Xbox at the Game Developers Conference was like every Christmas morning rolled up together.
Video game developers are upping the ante on creating realistic games. Microsoft ups the competitive ante, announcing a new concept codenamed Xbox.
At GDC, the idea was that Seamus would go on and basically be the demo guy, talk about Xbox, show the demos.
But this was the first time that Seamus had stood in front of an audience of game developers and gamers since the launch of Trespasser.
Before he came to Microsoft, we knew Seamus from his stint at DreamWorks on Trespasser.
It was a personal passion of Spielberg. He was very involved in it.
I'm in Steven Spielberg's office, and we're gonna do a game that could be a spiritual successor to Jurassic Park that takes all of the principles of game design that I thought were important.
Seamus really hit on this idea of trying to use physics to simulate a world populated by dinosaurs.
I wrote a big physics system in order to make an island that was completely physically simulated.
And they say every leaf and every branch that you walk into in the woods is gonna move. And that was kind of a dream that we're like, yeah, that sounds good, but how are you gonna do that? You know, how are you gonna make that perform? Well, the end of the story was we're not.
And I made every mistake in the book. You can read about this online, all the stupid things that I'd managed in that project. And we shipped it before it was done. We shipped this broken game right into the jaws of the birth of internet gaming sites and the first fan sites. I personally just got destroyed online. And I had never seen anybody destroyed online. We know what that's like now. I thought my career was over. Everyone who was present in San Jose at the Game Developers Conference, they knew my failures with Trespasser. I remember sitting in my hotel room and I had to convince myself to just go show my face at this thing. And it was terrifying.
The day of the unveil of Xbox, I took 3 Xboxes with me, like these metal X's, 1 for the stage and then 2 for as like, you know, what happens if this fails.
We hand carry these things down in transit because these things are fragile. The idea was showing live demos, proving that we actually had nothing up our sleeves.
The game developers are not going to be tolerant of any level of bull at all.
All the things on the screen were specifically to show game developers that this Xbox was far and away better than any of the other consoles that they'd ever seen before.
And they have to be done in such a way where it's clearly interactive, clearly real, clearly running on the hardware as advertised.
We hand carry them down, we set them up, we turn them on. The first one doesn't work.
I opened up the first machine, like I'm like, what the is going on here? Like something jiggling around that wasn't quite right, and you're like, oh my god, like what happened in there?
So then we set up the second one, it doesn't work either. And the third one, none of them work.
Nossa.
Seamus is backstage soldering, trying to get everything ready as the auditorium is filling up.
He was looking on the verge of green. He just looked sick. You know, I was like, well, maybe this is stage nerves, but then I realized, you know, well, maybe it's also because all of our demo machines were completely deconstructed.
We're panicked out of our minds because Seamus went on stage to talk to the most cynical audience in the entire world.
If you took a photo from the stage of GDC, you would see, you know, gamers and game developers, and they'd all look very excited. But underneath that layer are, you know, the most critical people you've ever met, waiting to hate that thing that you created.
Kevin was underneath the stage with a video switch box that could switch from the Xbox prototype that was on stage running the demos to one that Drew was standing backstage doing everything the same way I was doing it, so Kevin could switch between the two of them in case it crashed. And then it's in front of the boss. The boss is coming on.
I'd like to ask Seamus Blackley to come on out and give us a look.
And then somebody decided we're gonna make him put on a special leather jacket that doesn't really fit him.
We don't have the box, but we do have the leather jacket, so we're ready to go.
Well, we do have one box. This is our show box. So now, as I walk out on stage with Bill G, the full weight of my failed game, Trespasser, all of my dreams in the game industry, the ridicule that I thought I was going to suffer at the hands of every game developer who saw me fail to deliver this great thing, all of that pressure came to bear. We get up there, and I run the first demo.
What I'm going to show you now is an example of advanced lighting techniques that are possible under DirectX 8.
A primeira apresentação do protótipo do Xbox, galera. Tudo cagado nos bastidores e os caras ainda conseguiram, hein?
Drawn across very complicated objects. There are reflections, there's environment mapping going on. And all this is happening at full hardware rate. Another great example of that is our water demo.
You can now see caustics on the bottom of a pool. All those things come from the power processing on a per pixel basis. And that's really what the big differentiator was for Xbox.
This demo took, I think, a day to get running. And I can't underscore the importance of that enough. This takes Xbox from being a programmer-driven console to being an artist-driven console, a design-driven console. And that's really at the heart of the entire program.
The demo, it had a joke in it.
There's a classic Microsoft picture in the background.
Oh yeah, baby, that's texture resolution right there.
These were really smart demos and really ambitious. But when we saw the physics demo, I was like, wow, how's that computing?
In my high school physics class, I was scarred with the image of chain reaction as demonstrated by the old ping pong ball and mousetrap demo.
Physics was something that everybody wanted to do. Seamus had tried physics with his Jurassic Park game, and it didn't work so great. But now you were seeing those ideas actually working right.
A great example of the CPU doing all of this collision, all of this physics at the same time with the graphics processor.
Galera, olha que interessante, né? O cara que tinha falhado no jogo tá mostrando física funcionando perfeitamente ali e de uma forma com várias coisas acontecendo ao mesmo tempo na tela. Ou seja, o Xbox já era um console muito à frente, né? Que conseguia com qualidade, com gráfico interessante e tudo mais. E o legal, né? Ele tá ali tentando impressionar o pessoal que desenvolve jogos, porque, como eles disseram ali, todo mundo tava preocupado em melhorar a física dos jogos, né? E aí olha para esse tipo de coisa aqui, fica impressionado, né? Bem legal, bem bacana.
Rendering the scene for us.
Physics is cool.
The Raven and Robot video, you could see the photorealism.
The huge chrome robot that basically was motion captured by a female character called Raven.
The level of physics simulation that was happening there, how much the CPU was being taxed, you knew as a developer, this thing was really, really powerful.
I was like, wow, we have got to get onto this box.
I was very surprised by the Xbox. I was expecting it to be kind of cool, kind of like a stripped down PC, but what I wound up seeing very much excited me.
These demos were instrumental and so critical to the importance of Xbox and people believing in it.
To get honest, candid feedback from our peers, it was exciting because we saw the enthusiasm for Xbox and we knew that we had accomplished something.
Xbox is really going to be the king of the game stations. This is like a PlayStation 2 on steroids.
People are kind of giving us high fives, saying congratulations, and I'm like, do we actually do this?
I've never seen so much advance in one particular piece of technology.
PlayStation 2 com asteroides foi fogo, hein?
From that moment on, we had credibility
com asteroides.
With publishers and with game developers because it was clear we did know what we were talking about.
And the next thing that mattered was that Bill Gates showed up for it. That signaled to the industry and to the rest of the world, Microsoft as a company is backing it with all of its might.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Despite all the fanfare surrounding Microsoft's Xbox, industry analysts say the company is going to face fierce competition.
When Sony's newest video game console, the PlayStation 2, went on sale in Japan earlier this week, consumers were frenzied with excitement. They snapped up nearly 1 million units at $370 apiece in the first 3 days alone.
We were at a disadvantage compared to Sony and Nintendo because we didn't have the legacy of building fun.
And Sony, you know.
Isso aqui é importante que eles estão dizendo, mano, o legado, né? Há muito tempo atrás no meu canal, nem era esse canal, era outro, eu falava muito sobre o legado da Sony, né? Que a Sony hoje tá com uma política bastante anticonsumidora, mas ela tem um legado de jogos incríveis e naquela época ela já tinha esse legado. E o Xbox agora tinha um novo desafio com o primeiro Xbox, que era construir um legado, né, para continuar. Então, e outra coisa, vocês viram ali o PlayStation vendendo a $370 o console, né? 370, eu acho, né? Era bem caro os consoles naquela época. E o PlayStation sempre fazia uma forma para ganhar mais público, né? De baratear sempre o seu console para vendê-lo mais, entendeu? Com mais base instalada, mais jogos se vende, mais lucro se tem. Então o PlayStation já tinha todo o conhecimento da área, né? No PlayStation 2, já sabia como é que funcionava o negócio e sabia tocar bem o barco. Um grande rival do Xbox, com certeza. E o Xbox agora tinha um desafio e a gente vai ver como que os caras vão lidar com esse desafio, né? Vamos lá, vamos continuar. Ah, sim, deixa eu mandar um salve pra galera que tá chegando. Salve, salve, galera. O Marte chegou ali. João Vitor, salve, salve. Sim, o Marte até comentou ali que o Xbox já estava na frente em relação a hardware, com certeza. Só que assim, o Marte, o grande problema do Xbox agora, assim, eu imagino, né, era como conseguir vender esse monstro, né, que seria um PlayStation 2 bombadão, como eles disseram ali, como vender esse monstro por um preço competitivo, já que você gasta tanto porque tinha HD, tinha conexão com internet, banda larga, entendeu? Tinha coisas que os outros consoles não ofereciam, entendeu? E só que não podia ter um preço alto porque era um console que ninguém conhecia, entendeu? Então é muito bom. É verdade, o Elton Assunção falando que a história dos bastidores são sensacionais. Exatamente. Gamer Compact, salve, salve. Xbox é um console demais. Verdade, verdade. Imagina o frio na barriga, disse a Mia Trans aqui, ó. Imagina o frio na barriga na hora de ligar e não funcionar, né? Nossa senhora, imagina. Então é isso basicamente, né? Vamos lá, vamos continuar. O Eric falou, a Sony podia fazer uns videogames assim também, PlayStation, mostrando o outro lado também. Ah, fazer uns vídeos assim. Sim, podia mesmo, né? Fazer um documentário do PlayStation. Seria bem interessante ver também o outro lado, né?
Oh, they're movies, they're cool, they're awesome. And Microsoft is like, they wear khakis and they're boring and they're Office and they're Windows. And it's like...
For over a year, the team had referred to the top-secret new console only by its codename, Xbox. But now, they had a chance to christen it with a bold new name, one that wouldn't evoke Microsoft's corporate image.
Naming is the worst part of marketing. It's the hardest thing. Nobody ever 100% loves the name. Ever. Ever.
É, nome os caras não conseguem acertar mesmo até hoje, né? Nome de consoles.
Windows, people who know nothing about games.
Paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to go through the most rigorous system of naming, tested against all of the right customers, and they came back with list after list.
We had hundreds of names that were generated.
Friction, Cyclips,
and they were epically terrible.
Norbo,
Infinity,
Zod, XO.
O Luiz Otávio falou assim, aliados, boa tarde, esse Xbox desse modelo eu nunca vi. Então, esse modelo não existiu de verdade, Luiz. Luiz Otávio, ele foi apenas montado para o palco, ele era apenas o conceito Xbox, entendeu? Ele não existiu de verdade, ali foi para eles apresentarem o... Como é que tem um nome, né? O protótipo do Xbox, entendeu? É aquele... Quando o console não tá pronto, eles fazem um modelo de desenvolvimento ali e tal, depois é que eles vão fazer o modelo oficial, né? A princípio eles estão trabalhando mais no conceito, no que o console vai ser, a proposta do console. Depois eles colocam isso de forma física, né? E aí eles dão um conceito visual pra coisa e tudo mais. Então ali eles só apresentaram esse Xbox no palco mesmo, como eles explicaram até no documentário aqui.
OD, Shock Factor. Oh my God.
Olha os nomes que a galera tinha. Fireplug.
Equestria, Vibe with a Y.
Xantra. Xantra is absolutely a blood pressure medication.
Frontier.
Og. OG.
Velvet.
Xbox tá melhor que esses nomes aí, hein?
Simulate.
You see, anytime you're naming something, you have to play the kindergarten game that everybody plays with their children. You know, okay, I'm going to give my child this name. Now, how are people going to butcher that their first day in school, right?
Carpet ride? I was having conversations with Robbie about, Robbie, Xbox is a really good name. No, you can't call it Xbox. That's a code name. We don't name products code names. We need a new name. It's like, well, okay, we'll look again. We'd look again and come back. And Xbox is a pretty good name.
I remember our final meeting with the naming experts. They came in with the perfect name.
Então, o modelo era top, como você tá dizendo, Luiz Otávio. O modelo era top, só que é o seguinte... Como que os caras iam manter a placa soldada daquele jeito, né? Eles falaram que foi só mesmo para apresentação, porque para um console durar com aquela posição ali e tudo mais, com aquela estrutura, acho que não seria muito boa não, viu? Emanuel Venda, salve, salve. Toda geração eles fazem a mesma coisa. Como assim? Não entendi. Sim, entendi. Sim, eles fazem o conceito primeiro, depois eles vão... né, aperfeiçoando e tal. Na época saía muito caro as peças do Xbox para montar, por isso o valor era muito caro no mercado, por isso a Sony e Nintendo vendia mais pelo preço baixo, sim, porque também eles já tinham base instaladas, né, eles podiam vender mais barato, né, Mia? A base instalada do PlayStation era grande, da Nintendo também, então eles perdiam na venda dos consoles, mas recuperavam nas vendas de software, de jogos exclusivos e jogos que eram vendidos na plataforma, né? Cada jogo vendido na plataforma também rendia grana para a empresa responsável pelo console.
We've tested this extensively and it's a winner. We tested it against the name Xbox, it blows it out of the water. Great, what's the name? With great fanfare, they unveil 11X. You know, because it goes to 11.
Well, it's one louder, isn't it? 11.
I looked at the marketing people looked at me. and they said, all right, we'll get on Xbox.
Where can you go from there? Where?
I don't know.
Nowhere, exactly.
There was a big debate internally about whether we should call it the Microsoft Xbox or just Xbox.
We did a lot of blind research where we would bring in gamers asking questions about what should the role of the name Microsoft be on this console. First response when we mentioned Microsoft was they rolled their eyes. A video game console from Microsoft.
What? Microsoft? Doing a console?
First of all, it would take forever to boot up, and then it would probably blue screen.
And then we asked them questions like, hey, if PlayStation were an animal, what animal would it be? It would be a lion, be the king of the jungle. If Microsoft were an animal, what would it be? It'd be a spider. It could kill you, but you also just want to step on it.
If the name of Microsoft smothered the brand, it just was going to be a non-starter.
The idea that Microsoft could ever compete with Sony or Nintendo or even Sega was seen as a bit of a joke.
Might as well call it Nerd Box, right? Bill Gates was the richest man in the world. They were such an important tech force, but what they weren't was in the living room. They weren't an entertainment company.
Among gamers, 0% of people believe we could do it.
I was a journalist, and I thought, I don't know how Microsoft is going to make a console worth.
Can you imagine walking up to Bill like, hey, you know what the biggest liability I have in my new product launch is? The name of your company.
Let me find it.
Opa, galera, eu fiquei falando aqui sozinho mó tempão, manos. É, tava mutado, foi mal, foi mal. Eu dizia, galera, que nós estamos no site oficial do Xbox. Deixa eu voltar aqui rapidinho, né? Estamos aqui no site oficial do Xbox. Obrigado aí, Eric, por avisar que tava mutado. Gustavo também. Eu tava dizendo que a gente tá aqui no canal oficial do Xbox, que é de onde a gente está vendo o conteúdo. Estamos indo pro capítulo 3, né? Vimos agora o capítulo 2, que é sobre o conceito, como foi construído o Xbox, o nome e tudo mais. Agora a gente vai pro capítulo 3, né? Que é esse que eu acabei de abrir aqui. Tá meio fora de ordem, meio bagunçado, mas a gente vai nele agora. E se não der pra gente assistir todos hoje em live, amanhã eu volto e a gente termina, beleza? O capítulo 4, 5 e 6, tá? São 6 capítulos aí. E só que assim, eu volto amanhã se vocês gostarem, se vocês aprovarem o conteúdo. Vamos ver quantas pessoas vão querer assistir e tudo mais aqui comigo, tá bom? Mas a gente faz sim. Se não, vocês já sabem onde encontrar, no canal oficial do Xbox. Se não tá na live, não tá no Xbox Brasil até o momento que eu comecei a gravar essa live, não estava. E eu disse agora há pouco, e vou repetir, que eu acho que seria legal se eles dublassem o documentário, porque se eles dublassem o documentário, mais pessoas iam ter acesso, né? Ia ter maior acessibilidade aí. Mas eu não sei se eles têm interesse em dublar e colocar aqui no Xbox Brasil. Fica a minha sugestão aí, de repente fazer episódios compactos dublados, né? Seria legal pra galera BR poder acompanhar com mais qualidade. Mas vamos lá, vamos continuar então, né? O próximo capítulo. Se não der, a gente para por aqui. A gente continua os 3 próximos capítulos amanhã, beleza, galera? Que a live tá ficando bem longo. É bom que dá tempo da galera assistir, né? Dá tempo de assistir a primeira parte aí do nosso documentário, né? Do documentário do Xbox, beleza, pessoal? Deixa eu só ler, antes da gente continuar aqui, deixa eu só ler os comentários aí, sem áudio. Eu falei sim, João Vitor, é verdade. Você tem Halo 4 de Xbox 360? Gesiel, eu não lembro se eu tenho, cara. Eu não lembro se eu tenho em mídia física. Eu acho que eu tenho Reach só em mídia física. O Halo 4 não. Em mídia física eu tenho, acho que só o Halo Reach. O Homem Bomba 17, salve, salve. Tô assistindo o cara no YouTube, mexendo no YouTube. Foi mal. Eu mutei o áudio aqui pra não sair sons, né? Às vezes eu tô bebendo água. Eu parei agora há pouco pra comer alguma coisa que eu tava com fome, eu nem almocei direito hoje, então me desculpem, beleza? A Microsoft postou tudo fora de ordem. Sim, Gabriel, tá tudo fora de ordem, então vocês têm que olhar o capítulo que está, ok? Deixa eu até mostrar pra vocês, ó, esse é o terceiro capítulo, ó. A gente vai assistir agora o terceiro capítulo, tá? Se vocês gostarem, a gente traz mais conteúdo assim no a próxima live com esse evento, né? Eu considero um evento do Xbox, esse documentário, que tá incrível mesmo, beleza? O CXbox falou ali, salve, verdade, se você quiser, tinha que falar qual foi... Ah, não, isso aí é passado, cara, deixa pra lá. Deixa pra lá, o importante é que aqui é Xbox, lá é Xbox do jeito deles também, e vida que segue, né? Lamentável o que aconteceu, né? Mas acontece essas coisas, você faz um comentário na internet, você tem uma opinião e você às vezes acaba sendo privado de ter sua opinião, você não pode, porque senão você é isso ou aquilo, colocam coisas sobre você que você não fez e que você não é, mas aí deixa os juízes de plantão julgar, a gente só tá aqui fazendo o nosso trabalho como sempre, beleza? Mas tamo junto. O Game Pass vai chegar jogos novos? Aspirador de pó perguntou. Não sei, cara, não sei, hoje eu não tive tempo de olhar muitas notícias, só as que eu fiz de manhã. Acho que por enquanto não. Hoje o que vai ter mais tarde vai ser a promoção, né? Hoje é segunda-feira, né? Hoje, depois das 9 horas, começam as promoções aí. Se der tempo, eu ainda gravo o vídeo hoje pra vocês aí com os melhores jogos em oferta. Não sei se eles vão fazer agora ofertas de fim de ano, aquela oferta pesadona, boa, né? Mas a gente já vai descobrir, beleza? O Emanuel Vendas falou, Luiz Otávio, Microsoft disse que vai parar... Sim, vai parar com a retrocompatibilidade. Esse último lote de 74 jogos que saiu, foi 74, foi 76, que saiu foi o último lote, tá? Eles agora não estão mais podendo cuidar da retrocompatibilidade e eles explicaram o porquê, entendeu? Não dá mais porque tem algumas limitações, tanto dos jogos, que são limitações técnicas em fazer essa portabilidade aí pro console, né, via emulação na retrocompatibilidade, e também tem a questão dos licenciamentos que a Microsoft precisa ter a liberação, tá, das desenvolvedoras para conseguir colocar os jogos lá na retro por emulação. Não é tão simples quanto a gente pensa, porque não é uma retrocompatibilidade nativa, beleza? Basicamente é isso daí. O Xbox BR fazer seria um milagre, verdade, Byton, seria interessante se a gente visse. Fica a minha sugestão, né? Se alguém puder compartilhar esse trecho do vídeo com o Xbox Brasil, minha sugestão sobre esse documentário do Xbox é dublem e coloquem, né, no YouTube aí pra galera assistir dublado, seria interessante. Mas eu acho que só uma legenda é o que eles vão fazer no máximo, eu acho, né? Mas fica aí a ideia, né? Eu faria se eu fosse eles. Até porque a Microsoft tem dinheiro pra isso, né? A Xbox tem dinheiro pra isso. Chega lá na galera lá em cima, lá conversa e quem sabe consegue. O Ebon Jove falou que queria tanto Dragon Ball Raging Blast. Aí sim, hein? Beleza, então basicamente isso aqui. Vamos lá, vamos continuar. Vamos continuar.
Let me find it. Let me watch it real quick.
Eita, nasceu o Xbox. Olha o marketing, olha o marketing. Eita nós, o cara tá crescendo enquanto nasce, velho. Eita nós.
It's really good.
A vida é curta, jogue mais. Aí, ó.
Love it.
Jogue mais e brigue menos, galera.
And it did end up getting banned. Stations would not run the ad because it was, you know, so shocking for people.
Ah, mas não podia pôr esse comercial. Não foi pro ar, que pena.
Because it was really different than really the image that the company was trying to cultivate. Some of the stuff like that, commercial, I don't think senior leadership saw until it was done.
You know, we don't talk about Microsoft Xbox. We just talk about Xbox. Because Microsoft was good on the funding side, but bad on the branding side.
And if they wanted to go market it like they market Windows and they market Office, it was a deal breaker. It was not going to be successful.
The games industry did not speak the same language as Microsoft.
But if we were going to do this really hard thing and not lose billions and billions of dollars forever, we had to get it right.
People had to have the belief that they were working with the Xbox team. And if that meant there was something slightly unconventional that had to be done, the Microsoft bureaucracy wasn't going to get in the way.
There's a new contender in the video game wars.
Xbox is going to be the future. Truly the future of video games.
Xbox.
Taking over the living room.
Limitless, connected digital entertainment.
You guys never understood.
The company is going to face fierce competition.
Sniper!
It's a ticking time bomb.
Makes me very nervous to actually play this for you.
Xbox getting a major overhaul.
A bold vision for the future of gaming.
Power On, a história do Xbox.
The Xbox is a breakthrough game console that ships in fall 2001.
Most console companies start working on the next console as soon as they finish the current console. So 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. So for Microsoft to go from announcing in 2000 to being on store shelves in the fall of 2001 is kind of insane.
Before Xbox landed on store shelves, the team had to run a gauntlet of very public deadlines. A hardware rollout in Las Vegas at the Consumer Electronics Show. A first glimpse of Xbox games at Microsoft's GameStop event in Seattle. And finally, an event that brought the entire global gaming industry together to see what was new and judge it mercilessly.
E3 is the biggest moment of the year for games. For new entrants, it was really important to show up and make a good impression.
That E3 was critical for the Xbox, but you know, a lot of what you're showing is beta software and beta hardware.
Hardware that's not proven yet, or probably not even finished.
A lot of things at E3 can go wrong.
Adding pressure, the lead executive on Xbox development, Rick Thompson, had just left Microsoft, which meant Microsoft's mission to quickly deliver an industry-changing game console needed a new leader.
The idea of finding somebody else externally didn't make sense. We had a schedule that is crazy to begin with. The project just didn't have the time for that. Nor did we think that somebody externally could sort of fit into Microsoft and make this happen. And so I concluded that it was something I needed to do.
A new challenger enters.
Sort of a fateful decision because it led to the worst 18 months of my professional career.
It's a hard project. I mean, what we were doing is something that is intensely difficult.
Robbie was the grown-up. What's Robbie's role?
We were a young group of kind of ragtag kids.
Let's go ahead and take the cars, give them 3... What the hell's that? You know, I got a demo to do up here. I don't think Robbie should be seeing this.
What we needed more than anything else was we needed an adult in the room.
I was part of Office when it was smaller, and then as it grew big.
Robbie also has a sense of propriety, and I don't think we had a sense of propriety at all.
The opportunity here way outpaces that opportunity. I think is very exciting.
He was the one inside of Microsoft that Bill Gates trusted with all the complexity and the cost and the risk involved in doing something like this.
Robbie's a good guy. People can trust him. He doesn't break his word. However, everyone who comes into games can't be prepared for what it's like, because it's an entertainment business. The software doesn't just have to work and have the right features, it has to entertain also. This is hard.
I had no clue what I was doing. I didn't play games. The business model I barely understood.
We are launching an entirely new business competing against 2 established competitors in one of the largest entertainment industries in the world.
I was learning something new every single day. And that meant, obviously, I failed most days too.
And I think the next 6 to 8 weeks are going to be super exciting. A little challenging.
I didn't think about how to plan for going from 20 people to 2,000 people.
We went from 4 people to a dozen people to hundreds to, honestly, thousands involved in some way with the creation of Xbox.
It was crazy. I mean, it was no time at all before I didn't know everybody in the organization anymore.
When I think about it today, it just makes my head kind of spin sideways.
Every week, I would hear about somebody I knew in the game industry that was moving up to Redmond to work for the Xbox.
We just said, this all has to get done. We need bodies. So we hired people in bulk. We brought in teams of people.
I remember thinking, there's a lot of people changing their lives for this effort. It's either got to be something that everybody believes in, and they're willing to uproot their families and get behind this initiative, or it's going to be one of the biggest cluster of all time.
It became clear that we needed our own place because we were just going to bust at the seams.
So Microsoft has this beautiful campus and all these beautiful buildings and everyone works together. We were not part of that.
We went to this campus called Millennium, which was still in Redmond, but pretty far away from Microsoft.
Part of that was we needed space, but part of it is like, we need a few miles away from main campus to get some breathing room to do something different.
We were deliberately a renegade team.
They were rebels inside of the Microsoft empire.
We were kids in our early 20s who loved video games and could not believe that Microsoft had given us jobs to go create them, and we were all kind of growing up together.
The thing about games is it's Hollywood for nerds. You have your star directors, you have your Ferrari driving rendering engineers.
Congratulations.
And after a full day of working on making games, we would get together and play games. And there was a little bit of a weird culture of not leaving, which I think was maybe not the healthiest.
Maybe like a college dorm room kind of vibe.
Your social circle was Xbox, your family was kind of Xbox.
But we all had a common purpose, a passion around games.
Being able to do something very different and revolutionary was where you were getting our energy from.
Because we were still young, we had moments where we were like, wait a minute, like, am I the best person to be doing this?
It was definitely a whole bunch of kids making decisions above their pay grade.
You had a bunch of passionate people who weren't necessarily 100% the most qualified people to be doing the jobs, running as fast as they can to make this thing happen.
We were young and we were naive.
You know, I always call it the best funded startup ever.
Me, in my 20s, you know, I had millions of dollars of budget, and there wasn't really any oversight. It was a little bit of the Wild West.
You know, I had to negotiate all the components that went in, hard drives, power supplies, the circuit board. Here I am, this kid, negotiating these deals that are hundreds of millions of dollars.
There were definitely some terrible decisions being made. But on the other hand, that level of freedom, you know, made Xbox happen.
What resulted was sort of a weird combination of craziness and genius.
My recollection of that time was being so fascinated by watching this big company around us try to wrap its brain around what it meant to be an entertainment brand.
We didn't have a lot of interdependencies with the rest of the company.
It was Robbie, right, that had to go over to main campus and deal with Microsoft people.
One day, some executives came to visit the studio, and one of those people who came was Bill Gates. I showed him my cinematic tools and how I wrote scripts and how I laid down cameras in the engine. Bill spent time with Marty O'Donnell, our audio director. Chief, whatever you're gonna do, make it quick.
Raining aliens! Oh, Jesus, why you do this to me?
The hopes of all the Covenant rest on your shoulders, Chieftain.
He spent time actually watching Marty play some of the themes from Halo.
Dia, Tat. Dia, pá.
A dublagem do Halo ali, vocês viram que legal? Dublagem, musicalidade do jogo.
He went to go see our art department where one of our 3D artists was sculpting a character in clay, making a maquette. And at the end of the Bill visit, we got in the conference room, the leads of the studio, and there was a pause. And you can see the magnificent machine that is his brain calculating down the Microsoft org chart from him at the top all the way down to the crazy artists in this studio in a gravel pit, literally. And Bill leaned forward and he said, "So there are artists who work here?" It really was a cultural change for the company.
Xbox was already forcing
Galera,
people within Microsoft to think differently.
Olha que frase importante, né, mano? Do próprio Bill Gates. O Bill Gates não conhecia tão bem não conhecia tão bem os seus funcionários, né, bem dizer, porque olha que interessante, né? Os games eles trouxeram uma nova cultura para a Microsoft, que eram as pessoas trabalhando e se divertindo ao mesmo tempo, né? E não só aquela coisa do trabalho ali e tal. E uma das coisas que a Microsoft possibilitou, que o Xbox possibilitou a Microsoft, no caso, foi o fato deles manifestarem suas artes, né? Cada um ali tinha dublador, tinha músico, e aí o Bill Gates se impressionou, né? E ele disse essa frase aí, ó: então, artistas que trabalham aqui, né? Quer dizer, impressionante, né? Como os games podem revelar dentro de uma empresa como a Microsoft, aí, que era uma empresa séria, né? De software, de PC e tudo mais, e hoje viu videogame, né, como uma forma de entretenimento, e quem trabalha com videogame ter esse comportamento mais artístico, né? Isso bem bacana também. Sim, porque o videogame é uma forma de expressão artística, hoje mais importante até na minha visão, né? Claro, na minha visão apenas, posso estar errado, mas eu acho mais importante do que os filmes, por exemplo, porque o cinema é muito bom, ele emociona, ele cativa, ele marca, mas os jogos permitem que você seja o artista dentro dele, você seja o personagem, né? Executando ali suas coisas através da criação dessas feras que estão aí como os criadores do Xbox.
So, there are artists who work here. It really was a cultural change for the company.
Xbox was already forcing people within Microsoft to think differently, but what really mattered was changing public perception. Behind the scenes, software engineers were hard at work building Xbox's capabilities. Now, the hardware team had a chance to win over the doubters on a big stage at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
CES was a trade show where companies from around the world would come to unveil the latest in technologies.
A lot of buying decisions and retailers got made at that show for the holiday season, and so we had a lot of proving to do. The press was skeptical, gamers were skeptical. You don't know how to do this stuff. You've never done this before. Good luck. The gaming industry is not a believer.
While Microsoft works on the insides of the new Xbox, it focuses an equal amount of attention on the outside.
I was the creative director of Xbox.
Horace Luke is the man. Horace Luke is the man.
What Horace had to do was take the thing that we had produced in hardware and then figure out some wrapping around it. First time we ever showed him, like, hey, you're gonna need to put this board that we're about to manufacture for, you know, millions of consoles into something that looks good. He's like, what the f?
My office was where everybody brought their ideas, from the technology team to the design team to the management team.
At the time that we were building the original Xbox, there were no other consoles with a hard drive or an Ethernet port.
So how do we put something around this that vents heat, that survives a drop test, and looks cool?
You have to fit all of this, of course, into a box that's not gonna be giant sitting in your living room.
It was a constant battle between the different groups. I went through thousands of different sketches, trying to jam it and shrink it in every way possible into a box.
I remember him saying, like, well, maybe we just gotta slim it down, like, you know, we'll just dress it in black.
Everything was very aggressive looking. The console itself was large. It was bulging on the top.
It looked like the engine cowling on a Dodge Hemi. It was the physical embodiment of power, like no other console has ever been designed like this.
It was quite a miracle to fit everything in that box. Looking back today, you say the thing is huge, but in comparison to the PC
Galera,
of the
eu sempre
90s,
quis ter
it was tiny.
Bichão desse aí, ó.
A small miracle
Xbox
that we
original,
actually were
sempre quis
able
ter,
to
cara.
pull this off.
Tenho
And
uma
it looked
curiosidade de ver ele
awesome.
funcionando.
The 2001 Consumer Electronics Show is packed with every new gadget and gizmo about to hit stores.
CES 2001 in Las Vegas, in the Convention Center Hall. Bill Gates was there.
CES will actually give us a better idea of just where Microsoft is going to fit into the gaming market.
For the very first time, Microsoft was going to get to show off its final Xbox hardware design.
Good morning. Welcome to CES.
Everybody felt like we were on the verge of doing something special, historic.
For the first time, let me now unveil Xbox.
But when you show up as the third entrant into the space with well-established competitors. You have to break out. You have to be bold.
How do you unveil a product in a way that might surprise the world and get the world to see Microsoft doing something differently?
If you smell what the rock is cooking.
Aí sim. Apresentar o produto aí com fera.
We decided to bring The Rock to CES.
There was honestly some disbelief, like, you know, Bill Gates, The Rock, like, what's going on here?
Thank you, Bill.
It was really like muscle-bound Hollywood meets, you know, gamer geek of the tech world.
Just might appear that The Rock and Bill Gates don't have a heck of a lot in common. Well, The Rock's here to say that can't be farther from the truth. The Xbox is everything The Rock is. Cutting edge, powerful, exhilarating.
And they were funny together. Like, it actually worked.
And they looked like they were best friends.
I mean, The Rock doesn't impress easily, Bill, you know that, but I'm pretty damn impressed with what we're seeing here today. And considering that this Xbox at this moment is only running on 1/5 of the system's power, it's very impressive. Bill, do you have any idea what The Rock would be like if he were only running on 1/5 of his power?
Well, I would think that...
It doesn't matter what you think, Bill. I'm sorry, Bill. It's just a force of habit. Rock apologizes.
It went well. We showed nothing
Muito
technically,
bom.
but it started
Salve,
to
salve,
build the excitement.
Fragile!
We gave
The
it
Rock
5 out of 5
cachista
stars.
nato,
We really
né,
like the
Eric?
Xbox
Eric
a lot.
Cardoso,
You
verdade.
throw in an 8
E aí,
gigabyte
e aí,
hard
Julius
drive, a
Cachista,
10100
beleza?
Ethernet adapter, and you basically have the most powerful system on the block. The Xbox is really slick.
With excitement building around the console, Microsoft was under tremendous pressure to build a portfolio of hit games before the Xbox launch.
Esse modelo é bonito
By the
mesmo,
time they had
Mia.
announced that they wanted to do Xbox to the time when we needed
Esse é
to
o modelo
launch,
original,
it was an incredibly
verdadeiro, né?
short period of time. We didn't really have the luxury of saying, start building a game from ground up. That was almost impossible. What we were looking for were games that were partially in development, ports already in development.
Vocês viram ali o
We went
Fable?
out and started to
Ai,
look for
meu Deus do
developers
céu.
all over the world.
A barnstorming tour across North America, Europe, and ultimately Japan to create some sort of excitement around the console and convince game developers in particular that we could be successful.
All right, boys, let's roll.
One day we presented a new idea from a small game publisher that had come to us and said, hey, we want to dust off one of the 2D games that we had done for PC. We're going to really invest in it. We think it's going to be really exciting.
And these newly important executives in Xbox who would review all the pitches from publishers and developers, they said, I don't think that game is going to be able to make the transition from 2D to 3D.
They felt that it was complicated. They didn't really understand the user interface. They thought that it
Esse
was
joguinho
based
que
on a
vocês
game
viram
that
aí,
hadn't
ó,
been all that
é o
successful.
GTA,
To my
né?
surprise, it was rejected.
Como o GTA era. Ah, eles vão mostrar o
And
GTA
that
agora.
game was called Grand Theft Auto 3.
Não, vamos ver. Ó a diferença, ó. Esse é o GTA, quer ver, ó?
They said,
Esse aí é o
I don't
GTA,
think
galera, ó.
that game they're going to be able to make the transition from 2D to
Primeiro
3D.
e o segundo GTA era assim, ó.
They felt that it was complicated. They didn't really understand the user interface. They thought that it was based on a game that hadn't been all that successful. To my surprise, it was rejected.
Olha lá. Aí veio o GTA
And
que a
that game
gente
was called Grand Theft Auto
conhece,
3.
né? GTA 3 aí, ó. E aí começou as mudanças, né?
It
em
ended
GTA.
up selling 14.5 million units. It was the
Nossa.
top-selling game of 2001
mais
and would have been the
vendido
top-selling game of 2002 if it wasn't beaten by its own sequel.
It was
Foi
the
derrotado
past
só
heard
pelo
around the
próximo
industry.
GTA, ó.
Despite seeing Grand Theft Auto 3 go to PlayStation, Microsoft was still well positioned to attract other developers to its
Aí, ó,
platform.
o GTA
We
é um
needed a
jogo
vibrant and
importante para
strong
atrair desenvolvedores
third-party
na época, né?
lineup of games that customers
Quando
would
o
love.
GTA era top, né?
And we wanted the industry to look at us as something that was going to be
GTA tem
worthy
tudo
of
pra não ser
development.
mais, viu?
We wanted
Próximo.
to have the very best games.
On March 13, 2001, Microsoft put their commitment to developers on public display at their GameStop event in Seattle.
Thanks and welcome to GameStop 2001. What you're seeing is a sneak peek at what's to come on Xbox. We're going to start off with a game whose vision was really just too big to fit in the PS2, so we brought it over to the Xbox.
A Mia fez um comentário interessante ali, ó. Ela falou assim, ó. Na época foi uma grande guerra de consoles. Hoje em dia eles não querem mais brigar. Então, Acontece, Mia, que nós vivemos num mundo onde o poste tá mijando no cachorro, entendeu? Não precisa mais da marca brigar pelo consumidor, porque hoje o consumidor tá se matando pela marca. Ao invés da galera se unir, jogar junto e fazer o videogame lutar por ele, como era antigamente, a Sony, a Nintendo, o próprio Xbox, os caras iam pra cima, eles se enxergavam como concorrentes e queriam buscar quem? O consumidor, queria buscar o público, né? Hoje eles ainda têm que fazer isso, eles ainda fazem isso, mas você vê que hoje tem muito mais o fã defendendo a marca do que a marca se fortalecendo para buscar novos fãs, entendeu? Então, e o feedback da gente é muito importante, viu, pessoal? O feedback do gamer é importante. Então, quando você vê um canal que nem o meu aqui, que às vezes dá uma criticada no Xbox, é porque eu gosto do Xbox. Se eu não gostasse, eu tava só falando que ele é bom, que ele é maravilhoso e que ele não tem defeito, entendeu? Porque quando você critica alguma coisa, é porque você espera que aquela coisa seja sempre a melhor. A crítica que eu faço, muitas vezes, não é uma crítica para derrubar a marca, entendeu? Ir contra a marca. Pelo contrário, é uma crítica construtiva para que a marca continue e melhore o que ela já faz de bom, entenderam? Então hoje tá acontecendo isso, a galera hoje tá brigando pelo... Antigamente o videogame brigava para conquistar o público, hoje o público briga para poder ser escravo da marca, entendeu? Então, por exemplo, você vê o PlayStation às vezes fazendo um monte de cagada, tem muita gente que defende, que não vai contra, mesmo sendo fã, é aí que você tem que criticar, entendeu? E do lado do Xbox a mesma coisa, entendeu? O Xbox fez uma coisa errada, ninguém tem coragem de chegar aqui e falar. Eu sou um dos poucos que chega aqui e fala, e eu pago um preço por isso. Quase ninguém gosta de mim na comunidade Xbox, por exemplo, porque eu falo, tá ligado? Eu falo e vou sempre falar. Porque eu não posso perder minha autenticidade, mano. Senão eu abandono isso daqui. Se eu não tiver aqui pra fazer a diferença, pra ser um dos que vai apontar o dedo na cara do Xbox, se errar e falar assim, eu sou seu consumidor, eu consumo seus jogos, eu gosto da sua plataforma, então, por favor, mantenha-se aí firme e forte, que eu tô aqui para consumir o seu produto sempre. E o Xbox tem feito tanta coisa boa e positiva, a gente também não pode ignorar. Tem sempre que falar, sempre que elogiar. Mas eu acho que ficar com essa briga, tá ligado? Ai, porque o meu é melhor que o seu e tal, isso ofusca bastante a briga que as empresas têm que fazer pela gente, mano. A gente não pode esquecer que quem tem que brigar pelo consumidor é quem quer vender o produto. Não é o consumidor que quer comprar o produto que tem que brigar para que mais pessoas comprem o produto que você gosta. Você não é marqueteiro da empresa, você não é um funcionário, você não ganha comissão cada vez que o PlayStation ou o Xbox vende um console, entendeu? Então eu penso dessa forma e eu vou sempre ser odiado por isso e tá beleza. O importante é que tem pessoas que estão dispostas a ouvir o que eu tenho para dizer, enquanto tiver, tô aqui, beleza? Vamos lá, vamos continuar para não sair do foco aqui.
Our characters certainly aren't the muscle-bound superheroes, that we want to be. They're more like the poor, sad schmucks that most of us really are.
Getting Oddworld, that was important. It was an established PlayStation franchise, beloved by the console game.
Opa, uma pausinha aqui, o Emanuel Vendas falou assim, ó, até agora não tem o que reclamar do Xbox. Tem, cara. Tem um monte de coisa que o Xbox ainda pode melhorar. Por exemplo, você tá sabendo que o Halo Infinite mídia física, ele não vem com todo o conteúdo na mídia? Você não consegue instalar o jogo offline? Isso é uma coisa que tem que ser criticada. Entendeu? Os caras estão te vendendo o jogo em mídia física, mas você tá pagando por uma cópia digital, porque o jogo não roda pela mídia. O jogo você não instala ele no seu console se você não tiver uma internet. Então, assim, qual o propósito da mídia física se você tá comprando a mídia, né, para ter ele, para poder instalar offline, para ter tudo dentro do disco e não tem no disco. Você tem que estar online e fazer o download do resto do CD, senão você não consegue jogar. Isso é uma coisa que a gente tem que criticar. O Xbox Series S não ter uma versão com leitor de Blu-ray ou não ter uma forma de você usar um Blu-ray externo é uma coisa que tem que ser criticada. Ah, aliados, mas agora a onda é a mídia digital, ok, mas ainda existe um público muito grande que tem apreço pela mídia física. E o próprio Phil Spencer, numa matéria que eu li aqui no canal com vocês e dei minha opinião, ele falou que eles querem preservar os games, que eles querem, são a favor da mídia física. Como que são a favor da mídia física se estão exterminando a mídia física como a gente conhece, entendeu? O problema, galera, é que se eu falo essas coisas, o pessoal fica preocupado com o que o sonista vai pensar. Ai, mas um canal de Xbox falando essas coisas do Xbox é dar munição pro concorrente. Cara, eu não tô preocupado com o que o sonista pensa do Xbox. Eu tô preocupado é que mais gente venha pro Xbox porque ele é o melhor e continua sendo o melhor. Pra mim, o Xbox é o melhor console. O PlayStation eu tenho aqui é uma plataforma secundária. Eu tenho o PlayStation 3, tenho o PlayStation 4. Mas olha as horas que eu tenho de jogo no Xbox, olha quanta Gamerscore eu tenho no Xbox e olha quanto eu tenho no PlayStation. Amo o PlayStation, sou apaixonado pela marca também, gosto muito, mas é uma ótima plataforma secundária, entendeu? Agora, se o cara é fã do Xbox, ele não pode fazer uma crítica ao Xbox, né? Por exemplo, os Games with Gold precisam melhorar. Os Games with Gold tem que dar jogo melhor. Tá? Por que tem que dar jogo melhor? Porque é uma forma de atrair o consumidor para a marca. É uma forma de atrair mais assinante. Eu sei que o Xbox hoje não está tão preocupado mais com isso, que está focado no Game Pass. Mas seria interessante trazer um pouco mais de jogo atrativo no serviço, sabe? De vez em quando. Pelo menos uma vez, um mês sim, mês não, trazer um grande jogo. É uma coisa importante, entendeu? Então a gente tem que... Sim, quando à medida do possível, criticar. Até um tempo atrás a gente não tinha, por exemplo, no Xbox, os jogos free-to-play sem assinatura. Você tinha que pagar a Xbox Live Gold pra jogar um jogo free-to-play, sendo que o jogo free-to-play já te concede, ele é free-to-play, pô. Ele já te concede o direito de jogar online. Aliás, cobrar pra jogar online não faz sentido nenhum. E foi a Microsoft que inventou isso, de cobrar pra jogar online. Que é uma coisa que nós não devemos aceitar. Ah, aliados, mas o sistema da Microsoft, cara... cobra uma taxa simbólica pelo uso da Xbox Store ou qualquer coisa do gênero, da Xbox Live, qualquer coisa do gênero, mas cobrar pra jogar, você compra o jogo, você paga 350 pau num jogo hoje, e ele te permite jogar online, o servidor não é da Microsoft, você vai pagar pra jogar online, cara? Não me parece justo, mas beleza, é uma coisa que o mercado aceitou, que as pessoas aceitaram, virou hábito. Agora não tem como mudar isso de forma prática, entenderam? Mas a gente tem que lembrar que isso não é legal. Não é legal. Você pode cobrar uma taxa simbólica pelo uso dentro do console. Eu acho que o Game Pass já é assinatura suficiente para cobrar por qualquer coisa dentro do console. Acho que nada mais assim, pagar para jogar online, para usar aplicativo. O Xbox antigamente cobrava para usar aplicativo, galera, e mudou. Então a gente tem que falar sim, a gente tem que criticar sim, questionar, mas sempre com respeito. O problema é que assim... quando o cara critica o Xbox também, ele vira hater. Ele vai lá e compra o PlayStation e começa a falar mal do Xbox. Eu acho que não é assim. É a gente que tá aqui na marca, que usa a marca e que é fã da marca, é que tem que questionar ela com respeito, porque a gente sabe o que é melhor pra nós, entenderam? Então não podemos aceitar essas coisas, essa é a minha visão. O Renato Alves falou assim, então não compra o Xbox Series S. Cara, o Xbox Series S é o mais barato do mercado. Aí você vai dizer assim, ah não, mas aí então você tem que comprar o Xbox Series X, já que você quer mídia física. Cara, olha a diferença de preço do Series S pro Series X, é 5 mil reais. Um Xbox Series S, ele custa hoje aí na casa de 2.000, vamos colocar aí 2.600 em promoção, mas o preço oficial dele de lançamento era 3 mil reais. Se eles colocassem por 3.500, eu ia com a versão de Blu-ray. Se eles fizessem a versão, ó, 3 mil reais a versão sem CD, a versão com CD 3.500, eu ia de Series S com CD, com Blu-ray, entenderam? Eu acho que tem que ter opção, Renato. A partir do momento que a gente fala assim, ah, o Series S é digital. Não é, não. O Series S não é digital. O Series S não oferece uma opção que você jogue física. Tá? Então ele é ao digital por imposição, ele não é como opção. Eu aceitaria se fosse igual ao Xbox One. Por exemplo, o Xbox One S tem lá a versão Xbox One S com leitor e a versão sem leitor. Tem opção. Quem não quer a versão com leitor, compra a versão sem leitor e acabou. Entendeu? Mas não é uma opção. Ou você compra o Series S ou você não compra. Se você tem só 3 mil reais, vamos colocar assim, eu posso gastar até 3.500. Eu tenho um outro Xbox Series S que vai me suprir com leitor? Não tenho. Então a gente tem que parar de aceitar isso. Não é porque você não liga pra mídia digital que você tem que cagar pra quem liga, entendeu? Você tem que pouco se importar com quem liga. É esse individualismo que a gente tem na nossa comunidade, Xbox, PlayStation, enfim... é esse individualismo que tá acabando com a indústria gamer, cara. É de tantas pessoas só pensar, ah, eu não ligo pra história, eu só jogo multiplayer, então que se dane que Battlefield capou a história. Tá lá, Battlefield 2042 é um lixo. Tá lá comprovado, eu critiquei aqui, todo mundo veio cair de pau em cima de mim. Ah, mas é porque quem joga Battlefield não quer saber de modo história. Mentira, eu jogo Battlefield desde o Bad Company 1, desde o Play 2, na verdade, eu jogo Battlefield, e sempre teve história. Entendeu? Aí tirou porque eu me incomodei, eu sou errado. Quer dizer, então, que eu sou consumidor, eu quero comprar um jogo que seja completo, eu não tenho o direito de reclamar. Eu tenho que ficar caladinho, porque a galera que gosta do multiplayer cagou pra mim. Entenderam? É isso que eu tô falando pra vocês, galera. A gente tem que deixar de ser individualista. Não, tá errado sim o jogo pisou na bola sim, e assim, não é porque eu não gosto de história que eu acho que tem que tirar de quem gosta. Porque a gente tá pensando dessa forma, a gente tá andando pra trás, a gente tá retrocedendo. E com o Xbox, quando vocês falam assim, eu não ligo pra mídia digital, aliás, eu não ligo pra mídia física, que se dane, o Series S é um console digital, vocês que comprem o Series X, é você apoiar o erro da marca, é você... O Xbox não é o console das opções? Não é o famoso console das opções? Por que ele quer tirar a opção de você jogar com mídia física no Series S? Deveria ser uma opção também. Tá errado isso sim, eu acho que justamente não vai mudar porque vocês aceitaram o que eles estão impondo. O mercado tá impondo e só não vai ser assim se a gente não aceitar. Vamos retroceder aqui. Aqui só tá caixista, só tá a galera do Xbox que nem eu. Vamos retroceder em 2013, com aquelas políticas do Dom Métrico aí. Quantos de vocês foram comprar o Xbox One Fat, iam comprar o Xbox One Fat com aquelas políticas? Eu não ia. Eu falei pra todo mundo, eu falei, olha, se continuar com essa política, eu vou pro PlayStation, cara, porque eu não vou ficar num console que me obrigue a fazer uma série de coisas que eu não acho legal pra mim como consumidor. E não mudou o Xbox porque nós não aceitamos? A galera não caiu de pau? Não mudou? É assim que tem que ser, galera. Enquanto vocês abaixarem a cabeça, porque, eu não me importo, então que se dane, o mundo vai ser assim, mas é assim, o Brasil, o mundo é assim. Por isso que nossos políticos são os lixos, porque, você não gosta do Bolsonaro, vota no Lula, e que se dane o Brasil. Não, se eu quero o Bolsonaro lá, se eu tô reclamando do cara que tá lá, é porque eu quero que ele seja o melhor, eu votei no cara, eu tenho que cobrar dele que ele seja o melhor. Eu comprei um Xbox, eu tenho que cobrar dele que ele seja o melhor. Se você não quer reclamar, respeite pelo menos quem tá reclamando, entendeu? Então é assim que eu penso, galera, é assim que eu acho, tá? E o problema é esse, né? Foi o que o pessoal tocou no assunto aí. Infelizmente, aquela época existia a guerra de consoles, hoje existe a guerra de ataques pessoais. Porque eu penso isso, eu falo isso, amanhã vão me cancelar. Amanhã pegam esse trecho da live e vão falar assim, aí ó, esse cara não é caixista, porque o cara tá criticando várias coisas no Xbox. Né? Então, quer dizer, não se mede mais o quanto você gosta do Xbox pelo que você joga nele, pelo que você tem de história com o console. Se mede pela sua opinião, pelo seu pensamento, entendeu? Então é bem triste saber disso aí, galera. Mas vamos já sair do foco, foi mal, né? Foi mal, vamos lá. Vamos voltar pro que interessa aqui, que eu sei que vocês estão aqui para ver o evento aí, que é um evento, né? Esse documentário aqui é um evento.
Game community.
That's the last damn Gambit there is!
We had a chance to work with an amazing creator in Lorne Lanning. He did all the voice acting for his own game.
So Munch had these things we called fuzzles. And they were like, me. And Munch would be like, you got to come over and do this for me. You know, so and then Abe's like, come on, guys, let's go. And they were really vulnerable characters living in extremely dangerous worlds that you're trying to keep them alive, but when they get whacked, it's hilarious.
Next, we're really happy to announce our new relationship with one of the premier racing developer teams in the world, Bizarre Creations.
Project Gotham is a new product for Xbox. Now check out the reflections on this car. The whole environment is completely mapped to the entire surface of this vehicle.
Project Gotham Racing was based on your style of driving as much as how fast you cross the finish line.
For us, it was an opportunity to make this amazing, really accessible, fun, arcade racing game.
It's a really important part of our launch, and that was just the beginning.
Hardcore, freestyle, snowboarding. This is only one mountain of 7 international mountains we'll be bringing to you in AMP.
That double-ended axe is pretty wicked looking, and we can tell this is a hand-to-hand fighting game.
Playing a football game, you want to kick your buddy's butt so hard he's going to wear it for a helmet.
And that's it for our show today. I hope you got to see everything that you wanted. Did you see everything? Oh, I feel like I am forgetting something. What was it? Oh, Halo. Hey, how could I forget Halo?
Hey, everybody. So I'm Jason. I'm one of the co-founders of Bungie and the lead on Halo.
Bungie was a Mac-first developer. That's where they started. That's where they'd had their success with Marathon and Myth 2.
But Bungie was also dealing with the aftermath of a catastrophe. Myth 2, one of their hottest titles, had an installer bug that could erase a user's entire hard drive. In order to fix the bug and keep the company above water and working on new games, they needed a serious cash infusion.
Apparently they had this thing called Halo. I hadn't seen it yet. Some of my guys had. They had multiple games into development, but all I wanted was this new thing that they were working on. So we did a deal and bought out the company, and they started to work on Halo.
That's really when true development began on what the game would be. When we were purchased, Halo was not a game. There was no real story. There was no real sense of what the gameplay tempo would be like. We knew it was powerful to control a space marine who moved fast and could jump into a sophisticated vehicle and, haul ass around this alien world. And that was it.
What do you think, Jason? I got something for you. See it?
People knew about Halo. They knew that we'd been acquired by Microsoft. They knew about Xbox. They knew we were still working on the game. That period of getting Halo from a series of prototypes to on a disc playable by an Xbox was just a mad rush to get this game done. But there was this excitement that we had something special.
It makes me very nervous to actually play this for you. Welcome to Halo on the Xbox.
Curioso, né, galera? Curioso aqui, ó, a gente sempre ouve dizer que o Halo já era, quando foi comprado pela Microsoft, né? Ele era um jogo que já tinha toda a história, toda a lore, tudo construído pela desenvolvedora dele, aí foi comprado e tal, e agora a gente ouve dizer que os caras só não conheciam nada, né, sobre Halo, que não se tinha nada, né, sobre Halo, só sabiam que era entre aspas, um patrulheiro espacial, né, e tal. Interessante saber disso.
We started off that demo showing you flying to the land in a Covenant ship, running around the environment, getting in a vehicle, doing all those, building block Halo things. But we had our test environment, what we called a B30, the island map in the middle of the water with Halo in the background. It was just fun to play.
Pra época, era um baita jogo, né?
Coming out party for
eu não gosto do Halo 1, mas pra época...
moment where I think the whole organization began to wake up to, oh, there's something really special here.
Thank you, that's it. Good night.
Xbox had made a high-risk bet on Halo. At the time, first-person shooters were considered PC games. The only right way to play was with a keyboard and mouse.
At the time, people thought, well, how are you going to translate, mouse and keyboard game into a console game?
Dual stick first-person shooters had almost never been done on a console.
I remember right before the demo, Ed was very clear. He's like, hey, when you're playing, make sure that people see the controller. What we need to demonstrate is you can play a shooter with thumbsticks, maneuvering around the environment.
You can go back and you can look. Adamant blog posts that shooter games, like Doom, would never work with a game controller.
Can people actually play a first-person shooter on a controller like this? Is the audience going to accept it?
While gamers wrestled with the idea of a first-person shooter on a console, critics also keyed in on a not-so-tiny issue.
I don't like the controller. Unfortunately, it's big. I think it's too big.
The Duke, they call it. The Duke wasn't a small controller. It didn't feel cheap. I felt like you could kill somebody with it.
You had to have gorilla hands to work with this thing. It was the industry's biggest game controller.
The Duke controller was like a newborn baby. I mean, the thing is like 9 pounds, 3 ounces. You had to kind of hug it.
As an adult with big hands, you can hold it farther back and it's really comfortable and cool.
It was done bass-ackward, as most things were on the original Xbox.
To get to that design, we kind of used the human factors ergonomic approach.
For those of us with smaller hands,
Isso é outra qualidade,
oh my God, did all these guys just sit in a room and go, oh, yeah, this is gonna be great. It was like, oh.
Isso é outra qualidade do Xbox, né? Sempre ouvindo o público, né? Pra saber o que se adequa melhor, né? Para todo mundo, né? Isso é muito importante. Por isso que a gente tem que falar, né? Olha, não tá legal, não tá bom. Quando tiver tem que elogiar. E aí tá mais uma prova, né? De que o Xbox ouve, né? Então a gente tem que estar sempre dispostos a criticar sim, a exigir da empresa e tal. É bacana. E aí eles foram desenvolvendo o controle, né? O primeiro controle era muito grande, eles foram trabalhando o controle até ser bom para a maioria das pessoas, né?
Yeah, this is totally not going to work for us. And it was like, okay, this is a problem.
Perhaps we didn't take into account a full range of hand sizes.
There's no way we could ship Duke in Japan.
People couldn't use it there. There was almost a plea, you know, Carlson, you've got to find a way to make this smaller, please.
We knew it wasn't the right thing, but we didn't have enough time. E3 was coming up, and so we had to go with what we had.
On May 17, 2001, global gaming's biggest event, E3, kicked off in Los Angeles.
The E3 is clearly the Super Bowl, the Olympics, the
Ô,
World
Demian,
Cup, all
é legal
rolled
que eles
into one for the
criticam, né,
video
o
game
controle,
industry.
né?
For
Eles
Team
mesmo falam,
Xbox,
meu,
it
o
was the
bagulho
most
era
important
gigante, mano.
public test for their new console before a looming November launch date.
We're trying to make an impression at E3, and we don't know what hardware we're going to be able to show. And are we going to try to show a lot or a little? Should we show games at all?
We were heads down, focused on having all of our games prepped for E3, and it nearly killed us.
It's Broadway, it's opening night. You're going to read the reviews the next morning, and you're either hot or you're a flop.
I was pretty eager to get to E3 and get hands-on with the Xbox. But, your first...
O Miseras Gamers falou ali, nunca fui desrespeitado em nenhuma plataforma, vejo o Xbox mais acessível aos games e isso eu acho foda, mas hoje vejo a Sony me proporcionar mais jogos, mas são menos acessíveis. Sim, tem jogos muito bons lá do outro lado. Cara, eu gosto das duas plataformas, mas a minha preferência é Xbox, mano. Sabe, eu tenho um monte de jogo pra jogar no Play 3, no Play 4 aqui, eu tenho uma coleção de jogos em mídia física, mídia digital. Compro sempre que eu posso lá no Play também, mas o Xbox é onde eu tô sempre jogando, entendeu? Realmente por preferência, por gostar mais. E não tem problema nenhum você gostar mais de uma plataforma, de um jogo, de um console do que de outro, porque o legal é que hoje a gente tem mais opções e todas são legais, né? Quem não puder ter um Xbox pode ter um PlayStation, vai gastar um pouco mais, aí tem que ter dinheiro, né? Mas vai ter bons jogos lá também, e o legal é ter conteúdo bom pra todo mundo e a gente respeitar essas paradas, tá ligado? O grande problema hoje é essa imposição da comunidade aí, ou de parte da comunidade, na verdade, né, sobre videogame, né? Achar que você é obrigado a gostar mais do PlayStation ou você é obrigado a gostar mais do Xbox. Eu gosto mais do Xbox, prefiro, mas eu respeito que o cara goste mais do PlayStation. Eu entendo, o PlayStation tem jogos incríveis, como eu sempre trago aqui no canal e falo, entendeu? Você não tá errado, não. Você falou sobre desrespeito. Eu fui desrespeitado nas duas, tanto no Xbox quanto no PlayStation. Já fui muito desrespeitado, né, por ter as minhas opiniões, mas eu posso fazer o quê? Meu trabalho é esse aqui, cara. Quem não gosta, come menos, né? Fazer o quê?
Hardware is painful. And what you demo and what ends up on the store shelves are often very different things. And so I was really skeptical that this Xbox is going to be ready.
It's a pleasure for me to be the first to welcome you to Los Angeles for what I'm sure is going to be quite an exciting week. So it's 8 a.m. in the morning. The hardware team is like literally using duct tape to get...
Galera, o que eu gosto no Xbox, ó, o menino falou ali, ó, que o Xbox roda melhor e mais barato. Cara, o que eu gosto no Xbox é isso. É que ele te proporciona a ideia de ter jogos de forma mais acessível, por um preço acessível, e o fato dele ser o console das opções é o que me atrai no console. Por isso que eu fico meio pé da vida quando eu vejo ele não ser, né, aquilo que ele se propõe, né? Ele deixar de ser aquilo que ele se propõe, entendeu? Acabei de terminar esse documentário incrível. Esse documentário mostra como o Xbox foi importante para a indústria. Exatamente, Carlos Alberto. Salve, salve, meu querido. Tá lindo o documentário. Estamos acompanhando aqui ao vivo. Hoje não vai dar para eu continuar ele depois desse episódio aí, desse capítulo, mas eu acho que talvez amanhã eu já volto, ou depois de amanhã, e termino com vocês aí pra gente conversando. Beleza? Que da hora nessa apresentação o Bill fala que não pode ter exclusivo. Eu não vi. É mesmo? Não vi. Entendi, não é o respeito, poxa, só não vejo desrespeito, vejo política. Sim, isso é verdade também, Miseras. Eu vejo um pouco de desrespeito da Sony, Miseras, deixa eu te falar, cara. Eu vejo, ó, recentemente eu fiz até um vídeo falando sobre isso. Existe o Uncharted Lost Legacy, que é uma DLC standalone, que eu ainda não tenho. Eu tenho o Uncharted 4, mas eu não tenho a DLC. E eles removeram da loja, cara, a DLC standalone. Quer dizer, eu vou ser obrigado a comprar em mídia física, porque se eu quiser ter essa DLC agora, só existe um bundle que custa mais de R$200 ou R$200, certo? Eu vou ser obrigado a comprar esse bundle se eu quiser ter, sendo que a DLC é standalone, isso é uma venda casada. Se ele tem um produto separado, por que ele quer te obrigar a comprar junto? Sendo que se você calcular o preço dos dois juntos, o Uncharted 4 acho que estava custando 100 e pouco, e o coisa tava custando 80. A DLC standalone tava custando 80. Eu tava esperando entrar na promoção pra eu pegar, entendeu? E já não vou poder pegar. Por quê? Porque eu não vou comprar um jogo que eu já tenho de novo pra ter a DLC. Você entendeu? Então esse tipo de coisa é sacanagem do PlayStation também. E eu acho isso uma baita falta de respeito com o consumidor, entendeu? E essas e outras coisas que ela faz lá, entendeu? Então, assim, eu gosto muito do PlayStation, mas as políticas da Sony algumas vezes também, assim como eu tenho críticas ao Xbox, eu tenho algumas críticas maiores ainda ao PlayStation, porque, porra, os caras não têm um serviço bacana pra oferecer jogos de forma acessível. Fica com frescura até pra fazer crossplay, né, com o Xbox. Ai, não pode fazer, tu sabe, tudo é frescura. Os japoneses, cara, são muito, sabe, tradicionais ali, não querem aceitar que as coisas vão evoluir, entendeu? Só quando o benefício vem pra eles, né? Por exemplo, a Microsoft inventou a ideia de você pagar pra jogar online, e isso eles copiaram do Xbox, né? Isso daí eles podiam ser tradicionais e continuar não cobrando, por exemplo, né? Então é complicado, viu, mano? É complicado. Na época do PS3 eu alugava jogos na locadora. Já era caro agora. Então, e Renato, tem mais um detalhe. O Xbox te permite jogar. O Xbox te permite jogar sem ter um Xbox, né? Você joga no Xbox sem ter um Xbox através do xCloud, né? E você joga no melhor Xbox, que é o Series X, né? Tipo, eu que tenho o Series S, você que joga no PC, você tá jogando melhor do que eu comprei o Series X, o Series S, porque você tá jogando com toda a qualidade do Series X, que os servidores são do Series X, entendeu? Então pra vocês verem como a Microsoft tá preocupada tá preocupado com o jogo, mano. Tá preocupado em privar você de jogar, entendeu? Por isso que eu gosto mais. Não é que eu sou hater do PlayStation, não, eu adoro. Eu tenho vários vídeos aqui defendendo os exclusivos do PlayStation. Quando faz coisa boa, por exemplo, aquele não é State of Play, não, é... Aquele que ela deu o jogo, Stay Home, né? Stay of Home, não lembro agora o nome, enfim. Pra você ficar em casa jogando. Pô, eu ganhei vários jogos da Sony, isso eu acho bacana, a gente tem que elogiar, entendeu? A gente tem que mostrar os lados bons, galera, e ruins das duas plataformas, isso que eu acho importante. Fora os jogos 360 que a gente pode jogar também. Exatamente, Brian, exatamente. Você pode jogar jogo 360 tanto no seu Xbox Series, no seu Xbox One, né? Ou na nuvem também, né? Então é bem legal. Eu acho o Xbox melhor nesse sentido, tá ligado? Porque eu acho que ele não te priva de jogar, mano. Joga, meu filho. Você não precisa pagar 5 mil reais no console pra jogar. Você pode jogar do seu celular, você pode jogar do seu PC. Isso é acessibilidade, isso é chegar pra mais gente. Pô, gente, a gente é brasileiro, galera. A gente veio de uma época que a gente comprava CDzinho lá 3x10, mano. 3x10 na barraquinha pra jogar no nosso Play 1, nosso Play 2. A fitinha do Super Nintendo pirata. Quem não teve? Eu tive. Sabe, eu vivi tudo isso daí. Aí hoje o cara vê um serviço do Xbox, é ruim. Amanhã o PlayStation vai lançar o serviço dele e vai virar bom, né? Vai ficar bom. Não é State of Play não, o Demion. Eu esqueci o nome, cara. É Play at Home, né? Play at Home, eu acho o nome. Que eles dão um jogo grátis pra galera ficar em casa por causa da pandemia e tal. Eu achei uma campanha bacana dos caras, que eu acho que o Xbox devia ter copiado, né? Então, isso, Play at Home, o André Luiz, exatamente. Então... é isso aí, galera, é isso que eu penso, sabe, sobre as duas plataformas. E olha como é legal, a própria Microsoft fala no documentário dela da importância do PlayStation para impulsionar a Microsoft a correr atrás de fazer jogos, entendeu? Para vocês verem como essa concorrência é importante. Então vamos lá, galera, documentário de novo, voltando aqui.
Get the box done. Sony had their event the night before and a party afterwards. This was going to be our coming out party, and we now have a hungover media group at 8 o'clock in the morning coming to see Xbox. That is not where you want to be.
We've made Xbox a reality. And you can see here, if I slide this down, Xbox itself. Now live and ready to go.
I walk out on stage, and I do my first line.
And in fact, if I press this little button here on the front,
and then I, hit the magic button that's supposed to start the Xbox.
You'll see Xbox will actually start up. We can bring that video up. We can bring that video up.
And nothing happens. Nothing happened.
Well, if we could bring the video up, Xbox would be live and starting and running.
I didn't know what to do, so I just went on.
So it's with great confidence that on November the 8th, in the North American market, you'll be able to go into retail stores.
And
in less than a year's time, you're gonna release this thing into the wild and people are gonna be able to play it and you're gonna love it. And it doesn't turn on.
It was a devastating moment.
As the
Imagina,
hardware
mano, a situação do
planner,
cara.
like, I mean, my heart just sank.
And you'll be able to get a box just like this with Xbox in it.
It was
Que apresentação, hein?
A
Coitados.
legendary sort of press conference snafu. We had to convince the press very quickly that we had a box that worked, and we needed to get their hands on these games as quickly as we possibly could so we could wash away that moment that we had on stage.
We're very excited
No meio
about
da
that.
E3 isso daí, né?
But the disasters kept rolling.
Ah, os desastres continuam, tem mais.
The Xbox wasn't done yet. The graphics hardware that they were running on was running about half the speed of what we expected the final product to be at. Basically, I'm making excuses for it was slow.
Nossa, tava ruim.
Microsoft had never had a meaningful presence at E3 before. The booth was packed.
We decided to show Halo because we feel like we have to show what's going to be our key title.
In terms of the games we were working on, Halo had the biggest role. And so it was the E3 demo on the floor.
So many people were coming in with huge curiosity about what it was capable of, and I was completely disappointed. I'm like, the frame rate's terrible, the split screen stuff, it's kind of cool, but it just doesn't feel like it's powerful enough.
On the show floor, the unfinished game seemed to fall short of its original promise of revolutionary
Os
gameplay.
críticos caíram de
So now
pau, e
you
com
have
razão,
a
né?
bad launch event, and the key title that's going to carry the day looks bad, and people start to think we're crazy. Shortly thereafter, E3, Peter Moore, he's at Sega, and he says, hey, I want to give you our feedback from E3.
That E3 was critical for Sega to stay alive.
In February of 2001, Sega made the decision to discontinue the Dreamcast and focus exclusively on software. Part of that transition included a huge bet to focus on making games for Xbox. But a disastrous showing at E3 from Microsoft meant danger for Sega.
As we were moving from being a first party to a classic third party publisher, we absolutely needed somebody like a Microsoft to get us through this difficult period.
And so Peter comes up to me, and he looks at me and says, well, here's our feedback. Retailers aren't going to stock you, developers aren't going to develop for you, and consumers think the product's not very good and it's too expensive.
Ainda achavam caro, hein?
I
Ainda
took it
achavam o
very
console
personally.
caro.
I'm the leader of the team, it's my responsibility, it's my obligation, and I felt like I failed.
Caramba,
This
já
is my
pensou,
resignation
mano?
letter to my boss, Rick Paluzzo. I wrote this on Friday, May 25th, 2001 at 2:02 a.m. It starts off, my status on Xbox, importance high. This is not going to be an easy email to write, and frankly, I've postponed doing it several times. The short summary is that my direct involvement in Xbox needs to end, and sooner than either of us would like. I think this is both in my best interest and the best interest of Microsoft.
But Bill Gates and Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer did not accept Robbie's resignation.
Ah, não
They
aceitaram a
just
renúncia
encouraged me to
dele.
get it done and said, you've done a great job, keep at it, we're with you. I mean, it wasn't much more
Bacana,
they
hein?
could say.
História legal.
Right? There's no advice they could give me. They were too far away to say, hey, go do this. The only person who could figure that out was me. I never told anybody on the team. Rick and Steve and Bill. They're the only people that ever knew. That gives you the sense how personally challenging it was for a person who hates losing.
Electronic Arts is one of the
Caramba.
biggest game makers in the world, and its CEO, Larry Probst, was quoted in the Financial Times as saying this, that Microsoft has a lot to do over the next few months. They are on a death march now.
I don't think anybody had an easy ride to launch.
All we're thinking about is getting the device done so that we can make launch day. If you didn't have console units on retail shelves for a holiday, you missed a year. That holiday was vital.
There were a lot of late nights. We were trying to engineer and design something that we'd never done before.
We're building the technology, we're building the hardware inside.
The Xbox circuit board is about yay big. It had probably in the order of 800 parts.
Parts of the Xbox were coming from all over the world.
Like Hungary and Mexico.
You know, there were people who went and lived in China in a hotel room for weeks on end.
We would be flying back and forth with hard drives to get stuff back to test.
Microsoft had never shipped a console before. It turns out there's a lot of regulation everywhere in the world. You had to be certified by the right agency and approved.
Their approval took longer than we expected. Parts wound up getting delayed from suppliers.
It was every day, come into the office, see a fire, try to put the fire out.
We were tracking the hardware, tracking the components, tracking our launch dates at such an accelerated pace.
It was chaotic.
Chaos, total chaos.
People themselves were doing Herculean things.
We would sleep at the office.
This was all happening in real time.
It just never been done before.
Xbox was the toughest job I will ever have, or have ever had. I will never do it again.
Every day was a challenge, both sort of technically and professionally, but also personally.
You know, you were lucky if you had a personal relationship that survived launch. Mine did not.
It's kind of like you're on this horse that's bucking and you're thinking, okay, is this ever gonna stop or will this be the end of me?
8 to 12 weeks before launch. We're coming in way hotter than anyone expected to.
We doubted whether the hardware was going to be done in time. We're not sure any of the games are going to be done.
Mano, os caras tinham pouco
The ship is still on
tempo pra
fire,
fazer
the
o
plane
negócio,
hasn't
é
landed,
louco.
all the metaphors for crashes you can think of. But in the end, that team believed.
There's no
Por isso que
second
às vezes os
try at the
projetos dão
Xbox,
errado,
so
né?
this
O tempo é
was
curto,
a
mano.
Hail Mary culture. And if we were able to succeed, it was going to be absolutely epic.
Olha que gráfico da hora pra época, mano.
November 15th, 2001. Xbox was released in Times Square.
15 de novembro de 2001 começou a história do lançamento. Olha o Bill Gates.
We painted Times Square green. Everywhere you looked, you saw the Xbox green
Lá
logo.
tem marketing, né?
Xbox was up on all these big billboards. One of those moments in your life you're never going to forget. Here we are, a huge line of gamers down the street waiting to buy this Xbox.
20 years old, first time going to the city alone. I get on a bus and I show up in Times Square. I go straight to the new Toys R Us and I'm looking for the line. I'm prepared to stay there all day.
We worked with the city to open up the
Primeiro cachista aí,
WWF
galera,
restaurant
registrado.
across the street from Toys R Us Times Square. And that's where all the
Primeiro
gamers
cachistinha.
came first.
They have Xbox consoles set up everywhere. They pretty much just allowed all the gamers to hang out and play and test out all these games.
Bill wanted to be on site. He wanted to help hand over the first console.
Eita, mano.
Bill
que
Gates is
emoção,
down
velho.
at a gaming system, shook my hand and said, "You ready to play?"
Pronto
And
pra
then we were
jogar?
playing Fusion Frenzy. And Bill Gates made a comment that he had actually taken 2 weeks off of work just to practice this game. He wanted to beat the gamers.
Does anyone know what the shoot button is? Hey, I think. Hey?
He couldn't beat me. I absolutely took pleasure in beating Bill Gates, yes.
Derrotou Bill Gates, cara, que maneiro.
Been waiting a long time.
Everybody
E o próprio
got a
Bill Gates
tag
tava
on
lá,
their
né,
wrist.
mano?
And
Porra.
when your color was called, we brought you across the street to Toys R Us, and Bill was there to hand out the very first Xbox.
Tonight's kind of a celebration. It's after a lot of hard work.
So they count down. Bill Gates has it rung in on the register.
O primeiro
Price is up
cachistinha
there,
surge agora.
$299.99.
$300, ó.
One hits and he hands me the box and says, "Don't worry, I'm buying it for you." And I turn around with even more excitement and raise my prized possession over my head.
Edward
Uau, o bicho
Glucksmann
tava já
became the
fantasiado do
first
Xbox mesmo.
gamer in the world to ever own
Primeiro
an
gamer
Xbox.
a possuir um Xbox. Ó.
It was a
Primeiro
magical
cachistinha.
night.
Foi aí que tudo
I'm a
começou,
20-year-old
galera.
kid looking for a console. That's all I wanted to do.
É verdade,
First time going to the city alone,
Felipe.
I managed
Frase,
to get sent home in a limo.
It's a celebrity. Every night.
Nada, tá estiloso, menino, tá estiloso. Muito bom essa
They
história,
actually
né,
did
mano?
it. You know, Microsoft actually built and delivered this thing.
The feeling was like, crying level of exhaustion and intense pride for the thing that we had made.
Muito bom, já vou continuar, galera, estamos perto do final. C Soldier falou, salve, aliados, tá assistindo e viajando. Ah, verdade, C Soldier, muito bom, hein? CS Soldier, né? Não, é C Soldier, isso mesmo. Sim, mano, o Gregory falou ali, ó, que o Dreamcast foi a chave pro Xbox, essa é a realidade, sim, com certeza. E o PlayStation também, né, que na questão do desafio, né, de ser o o Nemesis do Xbox, né? O da Microsoft na época, fez o Xbox acontecer, né? Vocês viram lá atrás, né? Lá no começo da live a gente mostra. Então, acho que, meu, videogame, né? A própria Nintendo que tentou que a Microsoft tentou comprar, né? Os videogames têm... Verdade, misérias. História top. O Xbox teve a participação de cada plataforma, né, cara? De cada console, né? Cada marca.
There's never been a prouder moment in somebody's early career. You know, I still have goosebumps today thinking about it.
I tell people that faith is a force multiplier. That team believed. And because that team believed, Xbox got done. If that team doesn't believe,
os caras acreditaram desde o primeiro minuto, hein?
Never finish.
That small group of big personalities managed not only to convince Bill Gates and the board that we wanted to get into this nascent industry,
os caras são os heróis aí da coisa.
Managed to get an entire organization of game people created and pointed in the right direction.
Get in the subway. The whole station is covered in Xbox logos. I had to sit down and started to cry, and even Kevin got emotional.
It was an impossible task that we should not have been able to do. I was tremendously proud of it. But at the same time, that was the end of that special moment in time that we were all able to be part of. It was the end of an era.
With the Xbox out of their hands and into living rooms around the world, Kevin Backus and Seamus Blackley left Microsoft for new adventures in the game industry.
Olha só, os caras deixaram a Microsoft para outras aventuras. Mas deixaram um legado, hein?
Xbox went on sale at midnight, but when it comes to video games, it's not the system that counts, it's the games.
Nobody actually really cares about the hardware. All they care about is the content.
To be successful,
importa o conteúdo, isso é verdade. O hardware é importante para fazer o conteúdo funcionar, né?
Tem que ter, né? To go out and buy an Xbox if you wanted to play.
Halo was like this gem, like this was going to be the diamond we offered up at Xbox launch.
But remember, Halo showed up at E3, 6 months before the game was supposed to launch, with pretty serious frame rate issues.
Why is it running like internet video from the early 90s?
We got hammered for how it showed up on the floor.
This is our lead title.
Os caras foram massacrados, velho. Isso é louco. A mídia arregaçou os caras, mano.
I think there was a bunch of panic. People didn't see what they expected.
Também, né? Foi um desastre a apresentação.
There was an incredible amount of pressure on Halo. If Halo wasn't a hit, then the future of Xbox really was in doubt.
Acabou mais um episódio. Mais um capítulo aí, galera, chegando ao fim. Meu, vou aproveitar para encerrar a live aqui, tá? Mas, galera, foi muito bom mesmo. Nossa, digeri tudo isso daí. Nossa live ficou um pouquinho longa aí, 3 horas e 6 minutos, né, de live, vendo esse documentário. E estamos só na metade. Não é tão longo assim, é porque a gente para pra conversar e tal. Mas, mano, que da hora. Aí foi a história do primeiro Xbox, acho que acaba ali, né? Aí começa a falar agora dos outros consoles, dos outros 3 capítulos, né? Muito bom, mano. 20 anos de Xbox. Realmente muito bom. Galera, vamos então ver o resto na próxima live. Se vocês curtiram, deixa um like. Eu vou avaliar, tá? Eu vou avaliar para ver se vocês gostaram. Se vocês gostaram de verdade, eu trago aí a próxima live da gente assistindo o documentário, que é um evento, cara. Isso aqui é um evento. Vou descansar um pouquinho. Se der, ainda hoje eu trago as promoções aí em um vídeo. Se não der, eu trago amanhã cedo, beleza? E muito obrigado a vocês que assistiram o conteúdo até aqui, tá bom? Forte abraço pra todo mundo e até a próxima, beleza? Eu vou ficando por aqui. Um grande abraço a todos vocês, valeu e falou!